The silver serving tray slipped from Genevieve Whitmore's hands the exact moment the Dowager Duchess of Blackthorn stepped through the front doors of Blackthorn Hall. The sharp clatter of polished silver striking marble echoed through the entrance hall like a pistol shot. Every servant froze. Every footman turned. The housekeeper inhaled sharply. For one dreadful second, Genevieve stood motionless beneath the crystal chandelier, staring at the scattered teaspoons and porcelain cups across the gleaming floor. Then she noticed something even worse. The Dowager Duchess was staring directly at her. Not at the broken tea service. Not at the horrified servants rushing forward to clean the mess. Her. The older woman's face had gone completely pale. Genevieve felt a strange chill move through her chest. It lasted only an instant. Then the dowager's expression vanished behind decades of aristocratic discipline. "My apologies, Your Grace," Genevieve said quietly, lowering her gaze. The Duchess did not answer. She simply continued watching her. The silence stretched a moment too long. Then the housekeeper hurried forward. "Clean this immediately," Mrs. Baxter hissed. "Move." Genevieve knelt and began gathering the pieces. When she finally dared glance upward again, the Dowager Duchess had already turned away. Yet something about that brief encounter left an uneasy feeling behind. As though a door had opened somewhere in the past. As though a ghost had recognized her. 3 hours earlier, Blackthorn Hall had awakened beneath a veil of soft spring rain. The enormous estate stood upon rolling green hills just outside London, its grey stone walls rising from the countryside like a fortress built for kings. Generations of dukes had lived there. Generations had ruled vast lands, commanded fortunes, and shaped the destinies of countless families. Yet, on this particular morning, the most important matter occupying the household was not politics or business. It was a future duchess. The Duke of Blackthorn was finally bringing his fiancée home. Excitement traveled through the servants' corridors faster than wildfire. Cooks hurried through the kitchens. Maids polished every visible surface. Fresh flowers arrived by wagon. Silver was cleaned until it gleamed like mirrors. Footmen rehearsed protocols for receiving distinguished guests. Even Mrs. Baxter appeared unusually nervous. Genevieve spent the morning arranging flowers in one of the smaller drawing rooms. She preferred such assignments. Flowers asked nothing of anyone. They did not judge. They did not whisper. They did not measure a person's worth according to family connections or wealth. "You missed a spot." Genevieve looked up. Clara Simmons stood beside her holding a dust cloth. Clara was only 19 and had worked at Blackthorn Hall for 6 months. Her cheerful personality often brightened otherwise exhausting days. Genevieve smiled faintly. "I did not." Clara leaned closer to inspect the arrangement. "You are right. I know." Clara laughed. "One day someone is going to mistake you for a lady." Genevieve returned her attention to the roses. "Unlikely. You speak better than most ladies." "That is because most ladies spend too much time speaking." Clara grinned. "There it is again." "What?" "That dry little wit you pretend not to have." Before Genevieve could reply, Mrs. Baxter appeared in the doorway. The housekeeper possessed a remarkable ability to arrive exactly when conversation became enjoyable. "The Duke arrives at noon," she announced. "Everything must be perfect. Especially you." Her gaze settled on Genevieve. "No mistakes today." Genevieve lowered her head respectfully. "Of course, Mrs. Baxter." The older woman hesitated. Something unreadable crossed her face. Then she nodded and left. Clara waited until the door closed. "Why does she always look at you like that?" Genevieve pretended not to understand. "Like what?" "Like she cannot decide whether to hug you or fire you." Genevieve smiled despite herself. "Perhaps both." Yet Clara's observation lingered after she left. Many people reacted strangely to Genevieve. Some trusted her immediately. Others disliked her without knowing why. A few seemed unsettled merely by her presence. She had learned long ago not to ask questions. Certain mysteries were safer untouched. By noon, carriages rolled into the grand circular drive. Rain clouds had begun to clear, allowing pale sunlight to illuminate the estate. Servants lined the entrance hall. Footmen stood rigidly at attention. The butler adjusted his cuffs for the 3rd time. Genevieve positioned herself near the rear of the gathering. Invisible, quiet, exactly where she preferred to be. The front doors opened. Duke Sebastian Ashcroft entered first. Conversations often described him as intimidating. Genevieve thought the word incomplete. He carried authority the way mountains carried snow. Naturally, effortlessly. At 34, he possessed the confidence of a man accustomed to obedience. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat tailored with flawless precision, he moved through the entrance hall with calm control. Yet it was not his appearance that drew attention. It was his presence. People noticed him because they sensed power. Beside him stood Lady Victoria Graves. Beautiful, elegant, perfect, at least at first glance. Her pale lavender gown matched the latest London fashion. Diamonds sparkled at her throat. Her golden hair had been arranged with exquisite care. She smiled as though every room existed solely for her arrival. Several maids exchanged impressed glances. Clara looked positively enchanted. Genevieve felt nothing. Beauty had never impressed her as much as character. "Welcome home, Your Grace," the butler said. Sebastian nodded. Victoria's smile widened as she surveyed the magnificent entrance hall. "Even more beautiful than I imagined." Her voice carried easily across the room. Though perhaps a few updates would not hurt. The butler's expression did not change. Years of service had likely prepared him for comments from visiting aristocrats. Victoria continued walking. Then her gaze landed on Genevieve. Pause followed. Brief, almost imperceptible. Yet Genevieve recognized it instantly. Assessment, judgment, categorization. Victoria's eyes moved from her plain gray uniform to her neatly pinned hair. Something dismissive settled in her expression. Then she looked away. Genevieve returned her attention to the floor. The encounter lasted less than 3 seconds. It would not be the last. Throughout the afternoon, Lady Victoria demonstrated an unfortunate talent for discovering tasks that required Genevieve's assistance. "You there." Genevieve turned. Victoria stood beside a window in the blue drawing room. "Yes, my lady? Bring fresh tea." Genevieve curtsied lightly. "Of course." 20 minutes later. "You there." Genevieve approached again. "My lady, these flowers are wrong." Genevieve examined the arrangement. "Which flowers would you prefer?" "Different ones." "Certainly." 30 minutes after that. "You there." Genevieve stopped beside Victoria's chair. "Yes, my lady?" Victoria held up a glove. "This button is loose." Genevieve inspected it. The button was perfectly secure. "I shall ask the seamstress to examine it." Victoria smiled. "Do that." As Genevieve walked away, she heard a quiet laugh from one of Victoria's companions. Not cruel, merely amused. Yet something about the exchange felt deliberate. By evening, most of the servants had noticed it as well. Clara approached while Genevieve arranged fresh linens in an upstairs guest room. "She keeps choosing you." Genevieve folded a towel. "Apparently." "Why?" Genevieve considered the question. "Some people enjoy exercising authority." "She is unpleasant." "She is important." Clara wrinkled her nose. "Those are not the same thing." Genevieve could not argue. Later that night, preparations intensified. The Dowager Duchess was arriving the following morning. While Sebastian rarely inspired nervousness among the staff, his mother was another matter entirely. Eleanor Ashcroft was a legend throughout English society. Intelligent, influential, unpredictable. Stories about her circulated everywhere. Some claimed she could identify a liar within seconds. Others insisted she remembered every conversation she had ever held. Whatever the truth, few people wished to disappoint her. The following morning dawned bright and clear. Servants moved through the estate with renewed urgency. Genevieve spent most of the day assisting in the main reception rooms. Shortly after noon, word spread that the Dowager's carriage had entered the grounds. Excitement rippled through the household. Footmen hurried into position. Doors opened. Final adjustments were made. Genevieve found herself carrying a silver tray loaded with tea service pieces through the entrance hall just as the carriage arrived. The timing could not have been worse. The front doors swung open. The Dowager Duchess entered. and Genevieve dropped the tray. Now, kneeling amid shattered porcelain, she sensed eyes upon her, not merely observing, studying, measuring, remembering. The sensation lingered long after the dowager disappeared toward the drawing room. By late afternoon, rumors already circulated among the servants. Clara found Genevieve near the servants' staircase. "Did you see her face?" Genevieve pretended confusion. "Whose?" "The dowager's." Clara lowered her voice dramatically. "When she looked at you." Genevieve continued polishing silver. "I am sure I imagined it." "You did not." "Then perhaps she was displeased." "No." Clara shook her head firmly. "It was not that." Genevieve paused. "Then what was it?" Clara hesitated. "It was like she knew you." For the first time all day, Genevieve's hands stilled. Only for a second. Then she resumed polishing. Impossible. Yet as evening shadows stretched across Blackthorn Hall and candlelight flickered through the corridors, she found herself remembering the dowager's expression. The shock, the recognition, the impossible familiarity. Upstairs, members of one of England's most powerful families gathered for dinner. Downstairs, a maid tried very hard not to wonder why a duchess had looked at her as though she had seen a ghost. And somewhere inside Blackthorn Hall, a secret buried for more than 20 years had just begun to wake. Genevieve slept very little that night. Not because the servants' quarters were uncomfortable. She had lived in far worse places during the past 7 years. Nor was it because Blackthorn Hall felt unfamiliar. After nearly 8 months within its walls, she knew every corridor, every staircase, every hidden corner where silence could still be found. What disturbed her was a single look. One brief expression on the face of Dowager Duchess Eleanor Ashcroft. Recognition. The word lingered in her thoughts long after the household had fallen asleep. It made no sense. The Dowager Duchess moved among the highest circles of English society. Genevieve had spent years carefully ensuring that nobody from those circles remembered her existence. Yet somehow, when their eyes met, the older woman had reacted as though she had seen someone she once knew, or someone she had once lost. Dawn arrived wrapped in pale gold sunlight. The rain clouds had disappeared entirely. Blackthorn Hall gleamed beneath a clear spring sky. By 7 o'clock, servants already filled the corridors. Breakfast preparations were underway. Footmen polished silver. Housemaids dusted drawing rooms. The kitchen bustled with activity. Genevieve tied her apron and joined the morning routine. She intended to spend the day exactly as she spent every other day. Quietly, invisibly. Unfortunately, Lady Victoria Graves had other plans. "You!" Genevieve stopped beside a side table. Victoria sat near a bay window overlooking the eastern gardens. Sunlight illuminated her golden hair. She looked every inch the future duchess she expected to become. "Yes, my lady? My tea is cold." Genevieve glanced at the untouched cup. Steam still rose from the surface. "I shall bring another pot immediately." Victoria smiled. It was a pleasant smile until one looked closely enough to see the satisfaction underneath. "Thank you." 20 minutes later, Genevieve returned carrying fresh tea. Victoria accepted the cup, then took a single sip. "Too hot." Genevieve remained silent. "Surely there is a proper temperature for tea." Victoria set the cup down. "Or perhaps standards are lower among servants." Several ladies visiting the estate exchanged awkward glances. One of them looked embarrassed. Another looked entertained. Genevieve lowered her gaze. "I apologize, my lady." Victoria appeared disappointed by the calm response. Genevieve had discovered long ago that some people enjoyed conflict the way others enjoyed music. They sought it constantly. They fed upon reactions. Refusing to provide one often frustrated them more than any argument. By mid-morning, the household gathered in the grand drawing room for a formal reception honoring the dowager's arrival. Local aristocrats attended. Family friends appeared. Conversations drifted between politics, marriages, investments, and society gossip. Servants moved quietly among the guests offering refreshments. Genevieve carried a silver tray through the crowded room while doing her best to avoid attention. It almost worked. Almost. "You there." She stopped. Victoria stood near the fireplace surrounded by admirers. "Yes, my lady? Come here." Genevieve approached. Dozens of eyes observed the interaction. Victoria lifted her teacup. "This tea has cooled again." Genevieve accepted the cup. "I shall replace it. You seem remarkably calm." Victoria tilted her head. "Most servants become nervous under scrutiny." Genevieve met her gaze briefly. "I am accustomed to responsibility." A faint hush settled over the nearby guests. Victoria's smile tightened. The answer had been respectful. Yet something about it clearly annoyed her. Before she could respond, another voice entered the conversation. "A useful quality." Everyone turned. Dowager Duchess Eleanor Ashcroft stood only a few feet away. The room immediately shifted. Conversations softened. Postures straightened. Attention gravitated toward her with almost magnetic force. Eleanor's sharp blue eyes rested on Genevieve. Once again, that strange intensity appeared. Not hostility. Not curiosity. Something deeper. Something personal. Victoria recovered first. "We were discussing household standards." Eleanor continued watching Genevieve. "Were you?" "I simply remarked that this maid seems unusually composed." Eleanor's gaze never left Genevieve. "Indeed." Silence followed. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Eleanor said something unexpected. "What is your name?" Genevieve felt every eye in the room turn toward her. "Genevieve, your grace." The dowager's fingers tightened slightly around her fan. Such a small movement. Most people would never have noticed. Genevieve did. "Genevieve." Eleanor repeated the name slowly, as though testing it against an old memory. Victoria laughed lightly. "Surely your grace does not interview the servants personally." Eleanor finally looked at her. The temperature of the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I speak to whomever I choose." Victoria's smile faltered. "Of course." Eleanor turned back toward Genevieve. "And your family name?" The question struck harder than it should have. For years Genevieve had answered similar questions with practiced ease. Yet something about this moment felt different. Dangerous. The room waited. So did the dowager. Genevieve forced herself to remain calm. "Miller, your grace." The lie emerged smoothly. Eleanor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She knew. Genevieve felt it instantly. Somehow, impossibly, the older woman knew. Yet Eleanor merely nodded. "Very well." Then she walked away. Conversations slowly resumed. Guests returned to their discussions. Victoria seemed relieved. Genevieve was not. The dowager had accepted the answer. But she had not believed it. That much was obvious. Later that afternoon, Blackthorn Hall hosted a smaller gathering in the music room. The event was intended to be informal. It became memorable for entirely different reasons. Genevieve entered carrying a tray of refreshments. Around 20 guests occupied the room. Sebastian stood near the windows discussing estate matters with several gentlemen. Victoria sat beside the piano surrounded by admirers. Eleanor occupied a chair near the center of the room. Everything appeared perfectly normal, until Genevieve approached the dowager's table. It happened in less than 5 seconds. Genevieve lowered her tray. Eleanor looked up. Their eyes met. Then the Dowager Duchess of Blackthorn rose to her feet. The movement alone attracted attention. One did not ignore Eleanor Ashcroft when she stood. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Even Sebastian glanced over. Genevieve stepped back automatically. "Your Grace." Eleanor stared at her. Not as one looked at a servant. Not as one looked at a stranger. She looked at her the way a person looked at something impossible. Something returned from the past. Then, before anyone understood what was happening, the Dowager Duchess performed a formal curtsy. The room stopped breathing. Porcelain rattled softly against Genevieve's tray. Someone dropped a spoon. A gentleman near the piano blinked twice as though convinced he had imagined the scene. Genevieve herself forgot how to move. For a full second, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Nobody seemed capable of understanding what they had witnessed. A dowager duchess had just curtsied to a maid. Victoria rose so abruptly that her chair scraped across the floor. "Your Grace!" Her voice sounded strained. I believe there has been some misunderstanding. Eleanor did not look at her. Her gaze remained fixed on Genevieve. No. The word fell softly into the silence. There has not. Sebastian stepped forward. Confusion darkened his features. Mother. Eleanor finally spoke the word that shattered whatever remained of the room's composure. Whitmore. The tray nearly slipped from Genevieve's hands. Around them, whispers erupted instantly. Whitmore? Surely not. That family disappeared years ago. Impossible. Victoria stared between them. Whitmore? Eleanor continued. Answer me. Genevieve's pulse thundered in her ears. Every instinct demanded retreat. Denial. Escape. Anything except truth. Yet truth was impossible as well. The truth had been buried for years. Buried deliberately. I do not know what you mean, Your Grace. Eleanor took one slow step forward. Do not insult me. The words remained calm. They somehow felt more powerful because of it. Sebastian looked from one woman to the other. Someone explain what is happening. No one did. The silence stretched. Genevieve forced herself to breathe evenly. I am merely a servant. Eleanor's expression softened unexpectedly. Sadness flickered there. Old sadness. Familiar sadness. No. Her voice grew quieter. You are not. The room seemed to tilt beneath Genevieve's feet. Victoria recovered enough to laugh sharply. This is absurd. Nobody joined her. Even the guests appeared uncertain now. They looked at Genevieve differently. Not as a maid. Not anymore. Questions filled their faces. Eleanor turned toward the assembled company. Forgive me. An old memory surprised me. The explanation sounded polite. Convinced no one. Then she faced Genevieve once more. You may go. Genevieve did not hesitate. She curtsied and left the room immediately. Yet she could feel the weight of dozens of stairs following her all the way to the door. Behind her, whispers exploded like sparks in dry grass. By evening, every servant in Blackthorn Hall knew what had happened. By midnight, half the county likely knew as well. Genevieve stood alone beside a narrow window overlooking the moonlit gardens. The estate slept, or tried to. Somewhere downstairs, conversations undoubtedly continued. Questions multiplied. Speculation spread. For years she had hidden successfully. For years no one had looked closely enough. Now one woman had changed everything with a single impossible gesture. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned. Clara stood in the doorway, eyes wide with excitement. Genevieve. Yes. Clara stepped inside. Someone has been asking questions. A chill settled through Genevieve's chest. Who? The Dowager. Clara swallowed. And she is not asking about a maid. Outside, moonlight spilled across the ancient gardens of Blackthorn Hall. Inside, the first cracks had begun to appear in a secret that had survived more than 2 decades. And for the first time in many years, Genevieve feared that hiding might no longer be possible. The next morning, Blackthorn Hall awakened beneath a storm of whispers. Genevieve heard them before she even left her room. Servants spoke in hushed voices along the corridor. Doors opened and closed more carefully than usual. Conversations stopped whenever she appeared, then resumed the moment she walked away. News traveled quickly through aristocratic households. Mystery traveled even faster. By breakfast, everyone knew the same 3 facts. The Dowager Duchess had curtsied to a maid. She had called that maid Whitmore. And the maid herself had looked terrified when she heard the name. Genevieve tied her apron with steady hands. Years of practice helped. She had learned how to keep fear hidden beneath calm expressions. She had learned how to survive questions. What worried her now was not curiosity. Curiosity faded. Determined people did not. And Eleanor Ashcroft had the reputation of being one of the most determined women in England. The kitchens were unusually crowded that morning. Even Mrs. Baxter appeared distracted. The housekeeper was supervising breakfast trays when Genevieve entered. Their eyes met briefly. Something uncertain flickered across the older woman's face. Then she dismissed the other servants with a sharp wave. Soon only the 2 of them remained. Close the door. Genevieve obeyed. Silence settled around them. Mrs. Baxter folded her hands together. Is there something you wish to tell me? Genevieve had expected the question. No. Genevieve. Her voice softened. I have known you for 8 months. Yes. And in those 8 months, I have never once believed your story. Genevieve remained silent. Mrs. Baxter sighed. You arrived carrying a single travel bag and references from a household that no longer existed. Genevieve's heartbeat quickened. You never complained. You never gossiped. You read books that most ladies would struggle to understand. You speak French better than some diplomats. She shook her head. Servants notice things. Genevieve looked down at her hands. Then why hire me? Because whatever you were hiding, you never behaved like someone dangerous. Mrs. Baxter hesitated. And because I liked you. The admission struck harder than expected. Genevieve swallowed carefully. Thank you. Was the dowager correct? The question hung between them. No. The lie sounded weaker this time. Mrs. Baxter noticed. So did Genevieve. Yet the housekeeper simply nodded. Very well. She picked up a ledger from the table. I will not ask again. Relief should have followed. It did not, because both women understood the dowager would. An hour later, Genevieve carried fresh linens toward the west wing. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Sebastian Ashcroft. The Duke stopped immediately. So did she. For a brief moment neither spoke. Sunlight streamed through nearby windows, illuminating dust motes drifting through the air. Sebastian studied her carefully. Not coldly. Not suspiciously. Curiously. Miss Genevieve. She blinked. The title surprised her. Dukes rarely addressed servants so formally. Your Grace. A moment. She waited. Sebastian folded his hands behind his back. My mother believes she knows you. Genevieve kept her expression neutral. I cannot explain that. Neither can she. A faint smile touched his mouth. Which is unusual. Your Grace. My mother generally explains everything. The smile faded. Yesterday was different. Genevieve said nothing. Sebastian watched her a moment longer. You seem remarkably calm considering the circumstances. Panic rarely improves circumstances. His eyebrows lifted slightly. No, I suppose it does not. Another silence followed. Not uncomfortable, merely thoughtful. Then footsteps approached from the far corridor. Lady Victoria appeared. Her expression hardened instantly when she saw them together. Sebastian. The Duke turned. Victoria. She approached with graceful confidence. Yet her eyes remained fixed on Genevieve. I have been looking everywhere for you. I was speaking with Miss Genevieve. Victoria's smile became brittle. A servant. Yes. Something about Sebastian's answer seemed to annoy her further. Then perhaps your conversation is complete. Genevieve curtsied immediately. If your Grace will excuse me. She left before either could respond. Yet as she walked away, she felt Victoria's stare between her shoulder blades. By afternoon, Eleanor Ashcroft had launched her investigation. Genevieve did not know the details. She knew only the results. Questions appeared everywhere. The estate librarian received a visit. The steward received one as well. Several elderly servants who had worked at Blackthorn Hall for decades suddenly found themselves summoned for conversations. Even the village rector reportedly spent an hour speaking with the dowager. Each new rumor tightened the knot inside Genevieve's chest. She spent most of the afternoon organizing books in a small sitting room. The assignment suited her. Books asked fewer questions than people. The room remained peaceful until Clara burst through the door. Genevieve. Clara looked breathless. You need to come. Why? Just come. Against her better judgment, Genevieve followed. Clara led her through a series of corridors toward the older wing of the estate. This section of Blackthorn Hall contained family archives, storage rooms, and galleries filled with portraits of long-dead ancestors. Few people visited regularly. Today was an exception. Voices echoed from one of the galleries ahead. Clara stopped. There. Genevieve frowned. Why are we here? Clara pointed through the doorway. Genevieve stepped forward, then froze. A large portrait stood upon an easel near the center of the room. Dust had recently been removed from the frame. Several members of the household had gathered around it. Eleanor Ashcroft stood closest. Sebastian occupied a position beside her. Victoria lingered farther back, looking irritated by the entire situation. Genevieve's breath caught. The woman in the painting looked remarkably familiar. She possessed the same gray-blue eyes, the same shape of face, the same golden-brown hair. Time separated them by decades, yet the resemblance was undeniable. It felt like staring into a mirror that reflected another generation. Eleanor noticed Genevieve immediately. Her gaze sharpened. "Come here." Every instinct urged retreat. Yet refusal would only draw greater attention. Slowly, Genevieve approached. The gathered guests parted to allow her through. She stopped before the portrait. Silence settled over the gallery. "Do you know who this is?" Eleanor asked. Genevieve looked at the painting. Her throat tightened. Of course she knew. She had known since childhood. Yet she forced herself to shake her head. "No, Your Grace." Eleanor studied her face. "This portrait depicts Lady Caroline Whitmore." Several guests exchanged surprised looks. The name still carried weight. Even after 20 years. Eleanor continued. "One of the last members of the Whitmore family." Genevieve remained silent. "Do you still claim ignorance?" The question came quietly, almost kindly. That made it harder, not easier. "I do." A flicker of disappointment crossed Eleanor's features. Nearby, Victoria laughed softly. "Surely this has gone far enough." Nobody answered. Victoria folded her arms. "The resemblance is interesting. Nothing more." Sebastian looked from the portrait to Genevieve. Then back again. His expression had become unreadable. The similarity was impossible to ignore once noticed. Clara stood near the doorway with wide eyes. Several servants looked equally stunned. Eleanor stepped closer to the painting. Lady Caroline vanished shortly before her death. The room grew still. Her daughter disappeared soon afterward. Genevieve's fingers tightened around the fabric of her skirt. No trace was ever found. Eleanor turned. "Until now." "That is not true." The words escaped before Genevieve could stop them. Silence followed. Complete silence. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. Sebastian straightened. Even Victoria looked startled. Genevieve realized her mistake instantly. She had reacted too quickly, too personally. Eleanor moved carefully, as though approaching a frightened animal. "Then tell me what is true." Genevieve looked away. The portrait blurred slightly. Memories threatened to surface. A warm hand holding hers. A lullaby she had not heard in years. A silver ring catching candlelight. Fragments. Nothing more. "I cannot." Eleanor's voice softened. "Why?" Genevieve searched for an answer that would reveal nothing. "Because the past belongs in the past." "Not always." Their eyes met. For a moment neither looked away. Then footsteps echoed through the gallery entrance. An elderly man entered carrying a large leather-bound ledger. The family archivist. He approached Eleanor and handed over the book. "I found it, Your Grace." Eleanor opened the ledger carefully. Dust drifted from the pages. She turned several sheets before stopping. Then she looked at Genevieve. "Interesting." A chill traveled through Genevieve's spine. "What is?" Eleanor slowly rotated the book toward the gathered guests. Several leaned forward. Sebastian stepped closer. Victoria frowned impatiently. The ledger contained old family records. Births, marriages, lineages, names carefully preserved through generations. Eleanor rested one finger upon an entry near the center of the page. The Whitmore family crest. Genevieve's stomach dropped. She knew that crest better than anyone. Hidden among the faded illustrations was a symbol she had seen countless times throughout childhood. A silver lark surrounded by climbing ivy. The room buzzed with excitement. Questions erupted immediately. Speculation followed. Yet Genevieve heard very little. Her attention remained fixed upon that familiar symbol. Because for the first time in years, the past no longer felt distant. It felt close. Dangerously close. And as Eleanor Ashcroft continued studying her with quiet certainty, Genevieve realized something far more troubling than the portrait itself. The dowager was no longer searching for answers. She believed she had already found them. The only question remaining was whether Genevieve could continue denying the truth before someone else uncovered it for her. By sunset, the portrait gallery had become the most discussed room in Blackthorn Hall. Guests who had never shown interest in family archives suddenly found reasons to wander past the corridor. Servants exchanged theories while polishing silver. Even the gardeners reportedly debated the mystery while trimming hedges near the south lawn. Genevieve wished she could disappear into the walls. Unfortunately, the exact opposite seemed to be happening. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Hall, people were paying attention to her. Too much attention. The following morning offered little relief. The household assembled for breakfast in a smaller dining room reserved for family and close guests. Servants moved quietly between tables, refilling coffee cups and serving fresh pastries. Genevieve hoped to complete her duties unnoticed. Lady Victoria Graves ensured otherwise. "You!" Genevieve stopped beside the table. "Yes, my lady?" Victoria set down her teacup. "The flowers in my room are wilting. I shall replace them immediately." "You should have replaced them already." Genevieve glanced briefly toward the arrangement visible through the open doorway. Every bloom remained fresh. Victoria knew it. So did everyone else. "My apologies." Victoria smiled. "Do try harder." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One older countess frowned openly. Sebastian noticed as well. Genevieve saw his gaze shift toward the flowers, then toward Victoria. A faint crease appeared between his brows. He said nothing, yet the silence felt significant. Later that morning, Genevieve carried a stack of folded linens through the east corridor. She rounded a corner and found Victoria waiting, alone. The sight immediately raised concern. Victoria rarely sought privacy unless she intended to use it. "My lady." Victoria folded her arms. "I suppose you are enjoying this." Genevieve stopped. "Enjoying what?" "Do not pretend innocence." Victoria stepped closer. The attention, the whispers, the endless speculation. Genevieve kept her voice calm. "None of it was my choice." "No?" Victoria laughed softly. "That is convenient." Sunlight streamed through the nearby windows. Dust drifted lazily through the air. For a moment, the corridor felt strangely isolated from the rest of the estate. Victoria studied her carefully. "Tell me something." Genevieve waited. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish?" "Nothing." "I do not believe you." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Women do not accidentally attract this kind of interest." Genevieve met her gaze. "Perhaps some do." The answer landed harder than intended. Victoria's expression tightened. "You think yourself clever." "No, my lady." "Then perhaps you should remember your position." The words lingered after Victoria departed. Not because they hurt, because they revealed fear. For the first time, Genevieve realized Victoria felt threatened. The discovery surprised her. A future duchess had little reason to fear a maid, unless she no longer viewed her as one. That afternoon brought another unexpected complication. Eleanor Ashcroft requested Genevieve's presence in the library. The summons arrived through a footman. Genevieve considered refusing. She knew immediately that refusal would only create greater suspicion. 15 minutes later, she stood outside the enormous oak doors. The library was one of the grandest rooms in Blackthorn Hall. Thousands of books lined floor-to-ceiling shelves. Sunlight spilled through tall windows overlooking the gardens. The scent of leather bindings and old paper filled the air. Eleanor sat near the fireplace reading correspondence. Sebastian occupied a chair nearby. Genevieve's pulse quickened slightly. She had expected one Ashcroft, not two. "You wish to see me, Your Grace?" Eleanor looked up. "Please come in." Genevieve entered. Sebastian closed the book resting in his lap. Neither appeared hostile. Somehow that made the situation more unsettling. Eleanor gestured toward a small table. Several documents rested upon its polished surface. "I have been reviewing family records." Genevieve remained silent. The Whitmore family once owned substantial property throughout England. Eleanor's tone remained conversational. "Several estates, investments, land holdings." Genevieve stared at the floor. "I see. Do you?" The question carried quiet weight. Before Genevieve could answer, Eleanor changed direction entirely. Tell me something. Where did you learn French? Genevieve blinked. The question caught her off guard. Excuse me? French. Eleanor smiled faintly. You speak it fluently. Genevieve's stomach tightened. I know only a little. Sebastian raised one eyebrow. The gesture suggested he did not believe her. Unfortunately, he had reason not to. Several days earlier, Genevieve had forgotten herself while organizing books. She had quietly corrected a mistranslated French quotation written in the margin of an old volume. She thought no one had noticed. Apparently someone had. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Would you care to translate something? Genevieve hesitated. Your Grace. Eleanor opened a book resting beside her. Then she read several lines in French. Elegant, complex, literary, the sort of passage unlikely to appear in ordinary conversation. Genevieve recognized it instantly. A 19th-century essay she had studied years ago. Silence filled the library. Sebastian watched with obvious interest. Genevieve knew the safest response. Pretend ignorance. Yet something inside her rebelled. Perhaps exhaustion. Perhaps frustration. Perhaps the simple desire to stop pretending for 1 minute. Before she could reconsider, the translation slipped free. Smooth, accurate, effortless. The moment the final sentence left her lips, she regretted it. Eleanor smiled. Sebastian stared. Genevieve closed her eyes briefly. I apologize. For what? Eleanor asked. Knowing French. Genevieve looked away. Sebastian set his book aside. Where did you learn? I read. Most people who read do not speak with Parisian pronunciation. She had no answer for that. The silence stretched. Not hostile. Merely thoughtful. Then Eleanor spoke again. You remind me of someone. Genevieve's heartbeat quickened. Who? Lady Caroline Whitmore. The name filled the room. Sebastian glanced toward his mother. Eleanor continued. She possessed the same habit. Genevieve forced herself to remain calm. What habit? Answering questions honestly right before realizing she should not have. Despite everything, a reluctant smile tugged at Genevieve's mouth. It appeared before she could stop it. Eleanor saw. So did Sebastian. For one brief second, the room changed. The tension softened. The mystery became personal. Then the moment vanished. A knock interrupted the conversation. Victoria entered without waiting for permission. She stopped immediately upon seeing Genevieve. Her expression cooled. Am I interrupting? Not at all, Eleanor replied. Victoria approached. Her eyes moved from Genevieve to Sebastian and back again. The atmosphere spoke for itself. Questions, curiosity, interest. None of it pleased her. How fortunate, Victoria said lightly. I was hoping to discuss tomorrow evening's dinner party. Sebastian nodded. Of course. Victoria smiled. Yet her gaze remained fixed on Genevieve. Surely servants have work elsewhere. Eleanor answered before Genevieve could. Miss Genevieve was assisting me. The title again. Miss Genevieve. Not maid. Not servant. Victoria noticed. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How helpful. Genevieve curtsied. If there is nothing further, Your Grace? Eleanor studied her for a moment, then nodded. You may go. Genevieve left immediately. Yet as she crossed the threshold, she sensed Victoria's stare following her once again. The next day brought preparations for a formal dinner attended by neighboring aristocrats. Blackthorn Hall buzzed with activity. Additional flowers arrived. Menus were revised. Seating arrangements changed repeatedly. The event promised to be important. By late afternoon, Genevieve found herself helping arrange books in a small sitting room adjacent to the main gallery. Few people used the room. That suited her perfectly. She carried an armful of volumes toward a shelf, then paused. Voices drifted through the partially open doorway. Sebastian and Victoria. Neither appeared aware of her presence. You are spending an unusual amount of time investigating a servant, Victoria said. Sebastian's reply came calmly. My mother is investigating. And you are helping. Silence followed. Then Victoria spoke again. You cannot seriously believe this story. Which story? The ridiculous Whitmore speculation. Sebastian did not answer immediately. I believe there are unanswered questions. Victoria laughed. Questions are not proof. No. His voice remained even. They are not. Genevieve should have left. Instead she remained motionless. Something in Sebastian's tone held her attention. Victoria sighed. I simply find the entire situation exhausting. Why? Another pause. Because every conversation now seems to involve her. The words echoed softly through the doorway. Genevieve lowered her eyes. Sebastian's response arrived several seconds later. Then perhaps people are curious. Or perhaps people enjoy fantasy. Victoria's voice sharpened. A mysterious servant. A lost heiress. It sounds like one of those dreadful novels ladies pass around at tea parties. Sebastian chuckled unexpectedly. The sound surprised Genevieve. It was warm, genuine, rare. You dislike novels? I dislike nonsense. Sometimes nonsense turns out to be true. Victoria made an impatient sound. Surely you do not believe that. I believe facts matter. Silence followed. Then footsteps approached. Genevieve quickly resumed shelving books. Moments later, Sebastian entered the room. He stopped when he saw her. For a brief instant, surprise crossed his face. Then understanding followed. He knew she had overheard. Oddly, neither appeared embarrassed. Miss Genevieve. Your Grace. Sebastian glanced toward the shelf beside her. Several books remained stacked in her arms. You organize them by subject? Usually. He studied the arrangement. Not by author? Subjects are easier to find. A faint smile touched his mouth. Practical. Genevieve returned her attention to the books. Sebastian reached toward the stack. His hand paused over a leather-bound volume. Have you read this? She glanced at the title, then forgot herself completely. Twice. The answer emerged instantly. Sebastian looked amused. Twice. Genevieve realized her mistake. Again. It is a good book. I agree. He opened the volume. Several lines appeared on the page. His eyes moved over them. Then he looked at her. What does this phrase mean? The passage was French. Deliberately so. Genevieve stared at him. Sebastian's expression remained perfectly innocent. She almost laughed. Almost. Because for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Hall, she realized something important. The Duke was no longer observing a mystery. He was enjoying it, and that made him far more dangerous than anyone asking direct questions. The formal dinner arrived beneath a sky streaked with soft lavender clouds. Carriages rolled steadily through the gates of Blackthorn Hall as neighboring aristocrats gathered for an evening that promised elegance, conversation, and social maneuvering. By 6 o'clock, the entrance hall glowed with candlelight. Fresh flowers adorned every table. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble floors. The estate looked magnificent. Genevieve spent most of the afternoon helping prepare reception rooms. She welcomed the work. Physical tasks required concentration. Concentration left less room for worry. Unfortunately, worry had become increasingly difficult to avoid. Over the past several days, curiosity surrounding her had only grown. Guests whispered. Servants speculated. Eleanor Ashcroft continued her quiet investigation. And Sebastian Ashcroft had developed an unsettling habit of asking questions that seemed innocent while revealing far more than they appeared to. By evening, the household moved with practiced precision. Guests filled the drawing rooms. Music drifted through open doorways. Laughter rose and fell like distant waves. Genevieve carried a tray of refreshments through the West Salon while doing her best to remain unnoticed. She almost succeeded. Almost. Near one of the tall windows, a small group of guests had gathered around Lord Pennington, a wealthy baron known for discussing investments at every social occasion, regardless of whether anyone wished to hear about them. Tonight appeared no different. The shipping contracts will fail within the year. Lord Pennington spoke with complete confidence. The tariffs alone make success impossible. Several gentlemen nodded thoughtfully. Others looked unconvinced. Genevieve continued walking. Then she heard another voice. Not necessarily. Everyone turned. Eleanor Ashcroft stood nearby. The contracts include exemptions negotiated 3 months ago. Lord Pennington blinked. I was unaware of that. Most people are. Eleanor smiled slightly. The matter was handled quietly. The conversation might have ended there. Instead, another guest joined in. Even so, the southern routes remain unstable. Several people agreed. Discussion intensified. Opinions collided. Predictions multiplied. Soon a dozen aristocrats were debating trade policy beside the window. Genevieve attempted to pass unnoticed. Then disaster struck. One of the gentlemen accidentally brushed the edge of her tray. Several glasses rattled dangerously. She managed to steady them. Barely. My apologies, the gentleman said. No harm done, sir. The discussion resumed immediately. Yet one particular comment caught Genevieve's attention. A prominent merchant declared that certain shipping routes through the southern ports were economically impossible. The statement was wrong. Completely wrong. She knew because she had spent years reviewing shipping records with someone who understood international trade exceptionally well. Before she could stop herself, she quietly muttered, "The southern routes became profitable after the harbor expansion." Silence followed. Complete silence. Genevieve froze. She had spoken far louder than intended. A dozen faces turned toward her. Lord Pennington stared. The merchant stared. Eleanor Ashcroft stared. Even guests standing across the room looked over. Genevieve wished the floor would open beneath her feet. "I beg your pardon?" the merchant asked. Too late to retreat now. Genevieve swallowed. The harbor expansion reduced unloading costs. The merchant frowned. By how much? Approximately 18%. Several eyebrows lifted. Lord Pennington exchanged a surprised glance with another gentleman. That cannot be correct. Genevieve immediately regretted continuing. Yet the numbers remained fixed in her memory. Actually, it is. The merchant looked skeptical. How would you know? An excellent question. One she could not answer honestly. Before Genevieve could respond, Eleanor intervened. Perhaps we should hear her reasoning. The room fell quiet again. Genevieve realized escape was no longer possible. Carefully, she explained. She described shipping delays, harbor improvements, insurance reductions, freight adjustments. Each point connected logically to the next. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Simply facts. When she finished, nobody spoke for several seconds. Then the merchant laughed. Not mockingly. Amazedly. Good heavens. Lord Pennington shook his head. She is right. How do you know? Someone asked. Because those numbers match a report I received last month. The merchant stared openly at Genevieve now. Who taught you economics? Genevieve lowered her eyes. I enjoy reading. Laughter rippled through the room. Not cruel laughter. Disbelieving laughter. Nobody believed that answer. Least of all Eleanor. Victoria, who had been standing across the salon, looked distinctly displeased. Sebastian looked fascinated. The attention became unbearable. Fortunately, another guest redirected the conversation moments later. Discussion resumed. The gathering moved forward. Yet something had changed. Genevieve felt it immediately. People no longer viewed her merely as mysterious. They viewed her as educated. That was far more difficult to explain away. Later that evening, the formal dinner commenced. More than 30 guests occupied the grand dining room. Crystal reflected candlelight. Silver gleamed. Servants moved gracefully between courses. Genevieve assisted near the far end of the room. From her position, she could observe much of the gathering without becoming part of it. Eleanor occupied a prominent seat near the center. Sebastian sat nearby. Victoria remained at his right. Throughout the meal, Genevieve noticed something peculiar. Whenever conversation drifted toward history, literature, languages, or economics, Sebastian occasionally glanced toward her. Not openly. Not enough for others to notice. Yet often enough that she noticed. It was becoming a problem. Curiosity could become interest. Interest could become investigation. Investigation could become truth. After dinner, guests migrated toward the music room. Some gathered around the piano. Others formed conversational groups. Several older ladies settled near the fireplace. Genevieve found temporary refuge arranging books in an adjoining sitting room. The quiet felt wonderful. It lasted approximately 10 minutes. Then Sebastian appeared. Miss Genevieve. She closed the book she had been shelving. Your Grace. He glanced toward the volume in her hands. History. Yes. For pleasure. Some people enjoy history. A faint smile appeared. You answer questions carefully. Experience suggests caution. Sebastian nodded as though considering the statement. You know, most people become uncomfortable when my mother investigates them. I am uncomfortable. You hide it well. Genevieve almost smiled. Another skill learned through experience. Silence settled briefly between them. Not awkward, merely thoughtful. Then Sebastian reached toward a nearby shelf. He removed a book, opened it, turned several pages. Translate this. Genevieve stared at the text. Italian, this time not French. She looked up. Sebastian appeared entirely serious. Your Grace, humor me. I should not know Italian. And yet I suspect you do. Their eyes met. For one brief moment, amusement flickered between them. Genevieve sighed internally, then translated the passage. Perfectly. Sebastian closed the book. As I thought. This is becoming unfair. The words escaped before she could stop them. Surprise crossed his face. Then genuine laughter followed. Warm, unforced, remarkably attractive. Genevieve immediately regretted noticing that last part. Unfair? He asked. You keep setting traps. And you keep walking into them. She could not argue. Before either could continue, footsteps approached. Victoria entered. Her gaze shifted instantly between them. The atmosphere changed. The warmth disappeared. Sebastian. Victoria. She smiled. The smile never reached her eyes. There you are. Sebastian straightened. Did you need something? Only my fiancée. The emphasis felt deliberate. Victoria turned toward Genevieve. I am certain Miss Genevieve has many responsibilities elsewhere. Genevieve curtsied immediately. Of course, my lady. She left before further tension could develop. Yet as she crossed the corridor, she sensed that Victoria's patience was wearing dangerously thin. The following afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. An elderly solicitor named Mr. Holloway arrived at Blackthorn Hall carrying several locked document cases. His arrival immediately attracted Eleanor's attention. The two disappeared into a private study for nearly 3 hours. Rumors spread instantly. Clara delivered most of them. He works with old family records. Clara whispered excitedly while folding linens. How do you know? Because I asked one of the footmen. Clara grinned. He asked another footman. Genevieve sighed. An impressive investigative network. Thank you. By evening, speculation had reached extraordinary levels. Some guests believed Genevieve was a distant relation of the Whitmores. Others believed she was an illegitimate descendant. One particularly imaginative theory claimed she was secretly engaged to a foreign prince. Clara found that version especially entertaining. Genevieve did not. As sunset painted the estate in shades of gold and amber, she escaped to one of the quieter garden paths behind the conservatory. Fresh air usually helped clear her thoughts. Tonight it failed. Too many questions remained. Too many eyes watched her. Too many pieces of the past seemed determined to return. She rounded a corner, then stopped. Something glittered near a stone bench partially hidden by climbing roses. Genevieve frowned. She stepped closer. A small object rested among fallen petals. Silver. Familiar. Her breath caught. Slowly, she picked it up. The ring felt cool against her skin. Time seemed to stop. The silver lark. The climbing ivy. The Whitmore crest. Her heart began pounding. She knew this ring. Not merely the design. This exact ring. She had seen it countless times as a child. Seen it on a hand she could still remember even after all these years. A hand that had once held hers. Footsteps sounded behind her. Genevieve turned sharply. Eleanor Ashcroft stood several feet away. The dowager's eyes moved immediately to the ring. Then back to Genevieve. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. Because in that silent moment, one truth became impossible to ignore. The past had just left its first undeniable piece of evidence in Genevieve's hands. And neither of them could pretend otherwise any longer. The silver ring felt heavier than metal should. Genevieve stood motionless beneath the fading light of evening, her fingers wrapped around the familiar crest while Eleanor Ashcroft watched her with quiet certainty. The garden seemed strangely silent. Even the breeze had softened. For several long moments neither woman spoke. Then Eleanor took a slow step forward. "Where did you find it?" Genevieve looked down at the ring resting in her palm. The silver lark remained untouched by time. The delicate ivy engraving wound around the band exactly as she remembered. Memories stirred at the edges of her mind. Warm laughter, candlelight, a gentle voice reading stories beside a fire. "Near the bench," she said softly. Eleanor's gaze never left the ring. "Do you know what it is?" Genevieve hesitated. The safe answer was obvious. She could deny everything once again. She could claim ignorance. She could continue hiding. Yet exhaustion had begun to wear away the walls she had built for years. "Yes." The admission barely rose above a whisper. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Not in surprise. In confirmation. "I thought so." Genevieve swallowed carefully. "How?" Eleanor opened her eyes. "Because there were only 3 of those rings." The dowager's voice carried a sadness that surprised her. "One belonged to Lord Whitmore. One belonged to Lady Caroline. And one was made for a child." Genevieve's hand tightened instinctively. Eleanor noticed. "You remember." It was not a question. Genevieve looked away toward the distant gardens. Sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. Beautiful colors. Painful colors. Colors that reminded her of things she had spent years trying to forget. "Memory is strange," she said quietly. "Some things disappear. Others remain." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I know." Silence settled again. Then Genevieve asked the question she had avoided for days. "How did you know my mother?" The older woman's expression softened immediately. For the first time, Genevieve saw something beyond curiosity. Affection. Genuine affection. "Caroline was my friend." The answer landed harder than expected. Genevieve stared. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Before either of us married. Before titles and responsibilities consumed our lives." She glanced toward the ring. She was brilliant, stubborn, entirely too brave for her own good. Despite herself, Genevieve smiled. The description felt familiar. "That sounds like someone I would have liked." Eleanor laughed quietly. "You would have loved her." The words lingered between them. Then footsteps approached from the gravel path. Both women turned. Sebastian emerged from around a hedge. He slowed immediately upon seeing them. More specifically, upon seeing the ring. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Am I interrupting?" Eleanor answered first. "No." Sebastian approached. His gaze moved from Genevieve to the silver band resting in her hand. "Interesting." Genevieve resisted the urge to hide it. "Barely." "Your Grace." Sebastian studied the crest. "That would be the Whitmore emblem." Not a question. A statement. Genevieve realized there was little point denying it now. "Yes." Sebastian looked genuinely surprised. Not by the ring itself. By her answer. "You admitted it." "The evidence is difficult to argue with." A corner of his mouth lifted. "A sensible observation." Eleanor watched both of them carefully. Then she surprised Genevieve once again. "Sebastian." "Mother." "Walk with me." He looked puzzled. "Now?" "Now." Sebastian glanced between the 2 women. Then nodded. "Of course." Eleanor turned toward Genevieve. "Keep the ring." Before Genevieve could respond, the dowager walked away. Sebastian followed. Yet after several steps he glanced back. Their eyes met briefly. Then he continued after his mother. Genevieve remained alone beneath the fading sunset. The ring rested safely in her hand. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone with her secrets. The realization was comforting. It was also terrifying. The following morning arrived bright and clear. Blackthorn Hall buzzed with renewed energy. News of the ring spread even faster than previous rumors. By breakfast, most of the estate knew some version of the story. Few versions were accurate. Clara found Genevieve while she arranged flowers in a small drawing room. "You have become famous." Genevieve groaned softly. Clara laughed. "One guest believes you are secretly related to royalty. Only one. Another believes you own 3 castles. 3. Possibly 4 by lunch." Genevieve shook her head. "People have too much free time. That is generally true of aristocrats." Despite everything, Genevieve laughed. The sound felt unfamiliar, lighter than it had in weeks. Unfortunately, the moment did not last. Victoria Graves entered the room less than 10 minutes later. Clara immediately found an excuse to leave. Genevieve did not blame her. Victoria closed the door behind her. The click echoed softly through the room. "We need to speak." Genevieve set down the vase she had been arranging. "My lady." Victoria approached slowly. Every movement remained graceful, controlled, yet tension simmered beneath the surface. "You seem very comfortable lately." Genevieve remained silent. "People speak about you constantly." Victoria folded her arms. "Guests, servants, even members of this family." The emphasis carried meaning. Genevieve understood immediately. "Sebastian, I did not ask for attention." Victoria laughed quietly. "No. That is what makes it effective." Genevieve looked at her directly. "Effective? Do not pretend innocence." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "I have watched you for days." Her voice sharpened. "Every conversation somehow returns to you." Genevieve chose her next words carefully. "I cannot control what people discuss." "Perhaps not." Victoria took another step forward. "But you certainly encourage curiosity." The accusation stung more than Genevieve expected. Not because it was cruel, because it was unfair. She had spent years avoiding attention, hiding from attention, sacrificing parts of herself to remain unnoticed. Yet none of that mattered now. Victoria had already decided what to believe. "I am sorry you feel threatened." The moment the words left her mouth, she knew they were a mistake. Victoria's eyes widened, then hardened. "Threatened?" Genevieve remained calm. "I meant no offense." "Clearly." Victoria smiled. The smile carried no warmth whatsoever. "Be careful." The warning hung in the air. Then Victoria turned and left. The door closed behind her. Genevieve released a slow breath. The conversation troubled her for reasons she could not fully explain. Victoria was angry. That much was obvious. Yet beneath the anger lurked something else. Fear. Real fear. The realization lingered throughout the day. By afternoon, another unexpected development emerged. Eleanor invited several guests into the library to examine newly discovered family records. The gathering quickly became one of the most anticipated events of the week. Curiosity filled every corner of the estate. Genevieve had no intention of attending. Unfortunately, Eleanor insisted. "Your presence is required." Genevieve stood near the doorway as guests gathered around the large reading table. Documents covered every available surface. Old letters, ledgers, property records, family journals. Sebastian occupied a seat beside his mother. Victoria sat nearby looking distinctly displeased. Mr. Holloway, the elderly solicitor, carefully sorted papers into neat stacks. Eleanor addressed the room. "Most of these records concern the Whitmore family." Immediate interest followed. Several guests leaned forward. Others exchanged eager glances. Eleanor continued. "Many assumptions have circulated over the years regarding their disappearance." She opened a worn journal. Some assumptions were incorrect. The next hour passed in a blur of revelations. The Whitmores had not vanished suddenly. Their decline had occurred gradually. Financial complications, legal disputes, tragic losses, misfortunes layered upon misfortunes until little remained. Guests listened with fascination. Genevieve listened with something closer to grief. These were not merely historical facts. They were fragments of her family, fragments of lives she barely remembered. Then Eleanor opened another document. Everything changed. The room grew noticeably quieter. Even Mr. Holloway seemed intrigued. "What is it?" someone asked. Eleanor studied the paper carefully. A personal letter. Her eyes lifted toward Genevieve. Written by Caroline Whitmore. Genevieve's pulse stopped, or seemed to. Eleanor read aloud. The words were simple, affectionate, entirely ordinary. Yet hearing her mother's voice emerge from a letter written decades earlier felt overwhelming. Several guests dabbed at their eyes before the reading ended. Even Sebastian looked unusually thoughtful. Eleanor folded the letter carefully, then looked directly at Genevieve. Your mother loved you very much. Silence filled the room. Genevieve could not speak, could not move, could barely breathe. Eleanor's expression softened. She mentioned you often. Emotion tightened Genevieve's throat unexpectedly. For years she had survived on fragments. Half-memories, scattered impressions, questions without answers. Hearing those words changed something. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Later that evening, after the guests dispersed, Genevieve found herself standing alone in the library. The room sat quiet beneath the glow of several lamps. Shadows stretched across shelves filled with centuries of knowledge. She should have left. Instead she remained, thinking, remembering, hoping. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. I wondered if you would be here. Sebastian stood near the doorway. Genevieve looked up. Your Grace. He approached slowly. Neither seemed eager to disturb the calm. Today was difficult. The observation was gentle, not intrusive. Genevieve appreciated that. Yes. Sebastian glanced toward the shelves. For what it is worth, I think my mother intends kindness. Genevieve smiled faintly. I know. Silence followed. Comfortable silence this time. Then Sebastian spoke again. There is something else. Genevieve waited. The ring. Her hand instinctively moved toward the pocket where it rested. What about it? Sebastian's expression became thoughtful. My mother says she has not seen it in 22 years. A strange chill moved through Genevieve. 22 years? Exactly 22. His gaze met hers. Which raises a question. Genevieve felt her pulse quicken. What question? Sebastian paused, then answered quietly. If the ring vanished with the Whitmore child 22 years ago, how did it suddenly appear in the gardens of Blackthorn Hall now? Silence crashed down around them. Genevieve stared at him, because for the first time someone had asked a question she could not answer. And somewhere beyond the walls of Blackthorn Hall, another person knew the answer already. Sleep abandoned Genevieve entirely that night. Long after the lamps throughout Blackthorn Hall had been extinguished and silence settled over the estate, she remained awake staring at the ceiling above her narrow bed. Sebastian's question echoed endlessly through her thoughts. If the ring vanished with the Whitmore child 22 years ago, how did it suddenly appear in the gardens now? The answer should have been simple. It should have comforted her. Instead it filled her with unease. Because she had not brought the ring to Blackthorn Hall. She had not carried it through the gates. She had not hidden it among the roses. Someone else had placed it there. Someone who knew exactly who she was. Dawn arrived wrapped in pale gray mist. Genevieve rose early, hoping work would distract her. It did not. Everywhere she looked, reminders surrounded her. Portraits, documents, conversations, questions. The past no longer felt buried. Felt awake. Watching. Waiting. By mid-morning, Eleanor Ashcroft sent another invitation. This time it was not a command. It was simply a request. Genevieve almost declined. Curiosity ultimately defeated caution. 20 minutes later she found herself seated in a private morning room overlooking the eastern gardens. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains. A tea service rested upon a small table between them. Eleanor poured tea herself. The gesture felt oddly personal. You look tired, the dowager observed. Genevieve accepted the cup. I did not sleep well. Eleanor nodded knowingly. Neither did I. For a moment they sat quietly. Then Eleanor reached into a leather portfolio resting beside her chair. Genevieve's stomach tightened immediately. More documents. More revelations. Eleanor removed a folded letter. The paper appeared old. Worn at the edges. Carefully preserved. I found this yesterday. Genevieve stared at it. What is it? Something I should have found years ago. Eleanor unfolded the paper. Her expression became unusually solemn. It was written shortly before Caroline disappeared. Genevieve's fingers tightened around her teacup. My mother. Eleanor nodded. Then she began reading. The letter was not long, yet every word seemed to carry extraordinary weight. Caroline wrote about fear, about uncertainty, about protecting someone she loved more than herself. She never named that person directly. She did not need to. By the final paragraph, Genevieve understood. The letter had been written for her. Not to her. For her. A message intended to survive if nothing else did. Tears threatened unexpectedly. She blinked them away. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. There is more. Genevieve looked up. The dowager hesitated. Caroline believed someone intended to take control of the remaining Whitmore holdings. Silence filled the room. Take control. Eleanor nodded. The family fortunes had already declined significantly. What remained was still valuable. Genevieve stared at her. Who? That is the problem. Eleanor's voice softened. The letter never says. Questions exploded inside Genevieve's mind. Questions she had never allowed herself to ask. What happened to my family? The words emerged quietly, painfully. Eleanor looked away toward the window. I do not know everything. Genevieve saw genuine regret in her eyes. But I know enough. The older woman inhaled slowly. Your father died when you were very young. Genevieve nodded. That much she vaguely remembered hearing. Afterward, Caroline struggled alone. Eleanor continued. Several business partners offered assistance. Some were trustworthy. Others were not. The room seemed smaller suddenly, more fragile. Then what happened? Eleanor met her gaze. One day Caroline disappeared. The words landed like stones. And me? Eleanor's expression tightened. You vanished with her. Silence followed. Long, heavy silence. No one ever found us. Eleanor nodded. No. Genevieve looked down at her hands. Fragments of memory stirred again. Not complete memories. Pieces. Carriage. Rain against glass. A woman holding her tightly. Voices speaking urgently. Then nothing. Years of nothing. Before she could continue, another voice interrupted from the doorway. I thought I might find you here. Sebastian entered carrying several folded papers. He stopped when he noticed the atmosphere. Am I interrupting? No, Eleanor said gently. Sebastian approached. His gaze moved between them, then settled on Genevieve. Concern appeared briefly in his expression. Not curiosity, concern. Somehow that affected her more deeply. He handed several documents to his mother. Mr. Holloway located additional records. Eleanor accepted them. Anything useful? Possibly. Sebastian sat across from Genevieve. There is evidence suggesting portions of the Whitmore estate were transferred under unusual circumstances. Genevieve looked up immediately. Transferred? Yes. He opened one of the papers. Several signatures appear inconsistent. Eleanor frowned. Forgery. Sebastian shrugged slightly. Perhaps. The word hung in the air. Not accusation. Possibility. Yet possibility alone felt significant. Eleanor carefully reviewed the pages. Her expression darkened. Good heavens. Sebastian leaned forward. What is it? She handed him the document. Genevieve watched silently as both examined the records. Then Eleanor spoke. Someone benefited greatly from the Whitmore collapse. A chill ran through Genevieve. Who? Neither answered immediately. Finally Sebastian looked up. The name appears repeatedly. Genevieve's pulse quickened. What name? He hesitated. Hargrove. The name meant nothing to her. Yet Eleanor reacted instantly. Arthur Hargrove. Sebastian nodded. You know him? Unfortunately. Eleanor set down the papers. He was one of the advisors involved with several struggling aristocratic families at the time. Her voice cooled noticeably. Including the Whitmores. Silence returned. This time it carried tension. Real tension. Genevieve stared at the documents. For years her past had seemed empty. A blank space. Now details emerged one by one. None of them felt comforting. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. More records appeared. More names surfaced. Most meant little to Genevieve. One did not. Caroline. Every mention of her mother felt like discovering a missing piece of herself. Eventually Eleanor excused herself to meet with Mr. Holloway. That left Genevieve alone with Sebastian. The quiet that followed felt unexpectedly comfortable. Sunlight warmed the room. Somewhere beyond the windows, birds sang among the gardens. Ordinary sounds. Peaceful sounds. You are overwhelmed. Sebastian's observation broke the silence. Genevieve laughed softly. Is it that obvious? To me. The answer arrived immediately. Their eyes met. Something shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough to name. Yet something changed. Genevieve looked away first. Everything I believed about my past is changing. Sebastian nodded. That would overwhelm anyone. I spent years convincing myself none of it mattered. And now, she stared out the window. Now I am not sure. Sebastian remained quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. You do not have to face it alone. The words were simple, honest, unexpected. Genevieve felt something tighten in her chest. Gratitude, relief, perhaps both. Before she could answer, hurried footsteps approached. Clara burst into the room looking breathless. Your Grace. She curtsied quickly. Forgive me. Sebastian rose immediately. What happened? Clara glanced toward Genevieve. There is a visitor. Eleanor's voice echoed from the corridor outside. Bring him in. Moments later, an elderly gentleman entered carrying a weathered leather satchel. His clothes were respectable but worn. His posture suggested age and long travel. Genevieve had never seen him before. Yet the moment his eyes landed on her, he froze. Completely froze. The satchel slipped slightly from his grasp. Emotion flooded his face so suddenly that everyone noticed. Eleanor stepped forward. Do you know her? The old man swallowed hard. His gaze never left Genevieve. Know her? His voice trembled. Genevieve's heartbeat accelerated. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then the man whispered words that changed everything. I carried her from Whitmore Manor the night she disappeared. Silence crashed over the room. Clara gasped. Eleanor gripped the edge of a nearby chair. Even Sebastian looked stunned. Genevieve could barely breathe. The old man took one hesitant step forward. Tears glistened in his eyes. You were 5 years old. His voice broke. And someone was looking for you. Every sound vanished. Every thought stopped. Because for the first time in 22 years, someone stood before her who had actually been there. Someone who knew what happened. Someone who carried the missing pieces of her life. And judging by the fear still lingering in his expression after all these years, whatever truth he carried was far more serious than anyone had imagined. The room remained silent long after the elderly man's words faded. Nobody seemed willing to disturb the fragile weight of the moment. Genevieve stared at him across the library. Her pulse thundered in her ears. 22 years of questions suddenly stood within arm's reach. The man swallowed hard. His weathered hands trembled slightly around the worn leather satchel. He looked as though he had carried this burden for a very long time. Eleanor Ashcroft recovered first. Please sit down. The man nodded gratefully. Sebastian pulled out a chair. Clara hurried to pour tea. Within moments everyone had gathered around the large table once more. The atmosphere had changed entirely. This was no longer curiosity. This was truth. Or the beginning of it. Your name? Eleanor asked gently. Thomas Mercer. He lowered himself into the chair. I worked for the Whitmores for nearly 20 years. Genevieve felt something twist inside her chest. 20 years. Long enough to know a family. Long enough to love one. You knew my mother? The question emerged before she could stop it. Thomas looked at her immediately. His eyes softened. Very well. Emotion roughened his voice. Lady Caroline was the finest woman I ever served. Genevieve looked away briefly. Hearing those words never became easier. Eleanor folded her hands. Tell us what happened. Thomas nodded slowly. For several moments he seemed to gather himself. Then he began. Your mother knew something was wrong months before she disappeared. Genevieve listened carefully. Every word mattered. She never spoke openly about it. Not at first. But I could see she was worried. Thomas glanced toward the window. Memories filled his expression. Visitors arrived more often. Meetings lasted longer. Arguments happened behind closed doors. Sebastian leaned forward slightly. Did she mention Arthur Hargrove? Thomas's jaw tightened immediately. The reaction spoke volumes. Yes. Silence followed. Eleanor exchanged a meaningful glance with Sebastian. Thomas continued. Lady Caroline stopped trusting him. Why? Genevieve asked. She believed he wanted something. Thomas sighed. Though she never explained exactly what. Sebastian looked thoughtful. The remaining Whitmore assets. Thomas nodded. Most likely. The old servant paused. Then his expression darkened. One night she called me into her study. The room grew still. She gave me instructions. Genevieve felt her pulse quicken. What instructions? Thomas met her gaze directly. To take you away if anything happened. No one spoke. Not even Clara. Thomas continued quietly. She said there might come a time when staying would be dangerous. Genevieve's throat tightened. Dangerous. The word echoed through the room. Yet Thomas never elaborated. Neither did Eleanor. The story remained focused on fear rather than harm. On protection rather than conflict. Did that time come? Sebastian asked. Thomas nodded. A few weeks later. His eyes lowered. Lady Caroline woke me before dawn. Genevieve found herself leaning forward. What happened? She packed a small bag. Thomas smiled sadly. You were half asleep. You carried a stuffed rabbit and refused to let it go. A strange image flashed through Genevieve's mind. Brief, faint, yet real. White fabric. Long ears. Tiny embroidered eyes. The memory disappeared almost immediately. Her breath caught. Thomas noticed. You remember? Only a little. His expression softened further. That is more than I expected. Eleanor reached across the table and touched Genevieve's hand gently. The gesture provided unexpected comfort. Thomas continued his story. Lady Caroline placed the ring around your neck on a chain. Genevieve instinctively touched the pocket where the ring rested. Then she told me to leave. Silence filled the room. Without her, Genevieve whispered. Thomas nodded. She believed she would follow later. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Sebastian looked away toward the shelves. Nobody needed to ask whether Caroline had ever followed. The answer sat painfully between them. Thomas inhaled slowly. I took you north. He smiled faintly. You complained about everything. Clara laughed despite herself. The tension eased slightly. Even Genevieve managed a small smile. That sounds familiar. It should. Thomas chuckled softly. You have not changed nearly as much as you think. The conversation continued for over an hour. Piece by piece, fragments of Genevieve's past emerged. Not all the answers. Not even most of them. Yet enough to form a clearer picture. A frightened mother. A loyal servant. A child hidden for protection. Missing years began acquiring shape. Meaning. Context. By the time the meeting ended, evening shadows stretched across the library floor. Thomas looked exhausted. So did everyone else. Eleanor arranged accommodations for him immediately. You will remain at Blackthorn Hall. Thomas blinked. Your Grace, that is generous. It is necessary. Eleanor smiled. We are not finished asking questions. Thomas laughed softly. The sound carried relief. Afterward, guests gradually dispersed. Clara hurried away to share the latest developments with the rest of the servant staff. Eleanor and Mr. Holloway retreated to review documents. That left Genevieve standing near the library windows. Alone, or so she thought. You are smiling. Sebastian's voice came from behind her. She turned. He stood only a few feet away. For reasons she could not explain, seeing him felt reassuring. Am I? Yes. His expression softened. For the first time in days. Genevieve looked toward the gardens. Moonlight was beginning to silver the lawns. I finally learned something real. Sebastian nodded. You learned your mother tried to protect you. The simple statement carried remarkable weight. Genevieve swallowed carefully. Yes. Silence settled between them. Comfortable silence. Increasingly familiar silence. Neither seemed eager to break it. Eventually Sebastian spoke again. Thomas gave you something else. What? Hope. Genevieve looked at him. The answer surprised her because it was true. Hope. A dangerous thing. A wonderful thing. A thing she had stopped allowing herself years ago. Yet now it had returned. The realization lingered long after the conversation ended. Over the following week, Blackthorn Hall transformed into something resembling an investigation headquarters. Additional records arrived. More correspondence surfaced. Thomas identified names. Mr. Holloway traced transactions. Eleanor coordinated everything with relentless determination. Throughout it all, Genevieve found herself drawn increasingly into family discussions. No longer treated as a servant. Not entirely. She still worked. She still insisted upon helping. Yet something fundamental had shifted. People sought her opinion now, asked her questions, included her in conversations. The change felt strange, wonderful, terrifying. Victoria Graves noticed every second of it. One afternoon, Genevieve entered a drawing room carrying fresh flowers. She stopped immediately. Several guests sat around a tea table discussing literature. Eleanor occupied one chair, Sebastian another. An empty seat remained beside them. Miss Genevieve. Eleanor smiled warmly. Join us. Genevieve blinked. Your Grace. We are discussing novels. Eleanor gestured toward the empty chair. You have opinions. Several guests laughed. Sebastian looked amused. Victoria looked furious. Genevieve hesitated. Every instinct warned against accepting. Yet refusing would only draw attention. Slowly she sat down. The conversation resumed. Within minutes she forgot herself entirely. Books had always been dangerous territory. She loved them too much. One discussion became another, then another. Soon she found herself debating themes, characters, and historical accuracy with a viscount known for intimidating half the county. To her surprise, she enjoyed it. So did everyone else. Everyone except Victoria. Genevieve noticed the future Duchess watching throughout the afternoon. Not speaking much, merely observing. The realization lingered afterward. So did another. Sebastian seemed to enjoy these conversations. More than he enjoyed most social gatherings. More than he enjoyed many of the aristocrats themselves. The discovery became increasingly difficult to ignore. Days passed. Then one evening, a formal garden reception brought dozens of guests to Blackthorn Hall once more. Lanterns illuminated pathways. Musicians played beneath decorated pavilions. The atmosphere sparkled with elegance and expectation. Genevieve spent much of the evening assisting with refreshments. She preferred it that way. Public attention still made her uncomfortable. Yet avoiding notice had become nearly impossible. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some greeted her warmly. Others stared curiously. A few openly speculated about her identity. The evening progressed smoothly until she overheard two ladies conversing near the rose garden. The Duke spends quite a bit of time speaking with her. Genevieve slowed unintentionally. Far more than one would expect. The second woman lowered her voice. Lady Victoria cannot be pleased. Would you be? Pause followed. Then soft laughter. Genevieve continued walking. Yet the words lingered. She had noticed it herself. Sebastian appeared wherever she happened to be. Libraries, gardens, drawing rooms, corridors. At first she assumed coincidence. Increasingly, that explanation felt inadequate. Later that evening, she discovered him standing beside the fountain near the eastern terrace. Alone, looking thoughtful. Moonlight reflected across the water. Music drifted softly through the night air. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Sebastian smiled. There you are. The words sounded strangely familiar, as though he had been looking for her. Genevieve felt something flutter unexpectedly inside her chest. Your Grace. You disappeared. I was working. Of course. His expression suggested he expected that answer. Silence followed. Then he looked toward the distant gardens. Do you know what I find most interesting about this entire situation? Genevieve shook her head. Everyone believes the mystery is your identity. She waited. Sebastian's gaze returned to hers. It is not. Her heartbeat quickened slightly. Then what is? A faint smile appeared. Warm. Genuine. Entirely too distracting. How someone managed to hide a remarkable woman in plain sight for 8 months. The world seemed to pause. Only for a second. Yet long enough for Genevieve to forget how to respond. Long enough for her pulse to betray her. Long enough for Sebastian to notice. And somewhere across the crowded terrace, Victoria Graves watched the entire exchange unfold. The silence that followed Sebastian's remark lingered long after the garden reception ended. Genevieve carried it with her through the remainder of the evening. Through the corridors of Blackthorn Hall. Through the quiet duties that occupied the final hours before midnight. How someone managed to hide a remarkable woman in plain sight for 8 months. The words should not have mattered. Yet they did. More than she cared to admit. More than was safe. Because Sebastian Ashcroft was no longer merely curious. And she was no longer indifferent to his attention. That realization troubled her deeply. The following morning arrived bright and warm. Summer seemed determined to settle over the countryside. Sunlight flooded the gardens. Roses climbed stone walls in vibrant blooms. Guests wandered the estate grounds enjoying the weather. Yet beneath the pleasant surface, tension continued growing. Whispers followed Genevieve everywhere now. Not only about the Whitmore mystery, about Sebastian as well. Aristocratic society excelled at many things. Privacy was not among them. By noon, preparations were underway for the largest social event Blackthorn Hall had hosted all season, a formal ballroom gathering. Nobility from across the county would attend. Influential families, wealthy landowners, political figures, distant relatives. Nearly everyone who mattered within 100 miles had accepted Eleanor's invitation. The timing felt intentional. Genevieve suspected it was. Eleanor had never struck her as a woman who believed in coincidence. You should stay upstairs tonight. Clara made the suggestion while helping arrange flowers in the grand ballroom. Why? Clara looked scandalized. Because half the county will be here. That happens frequently. Not like this. Clara lowered her voice. Everyone wants to see you. Genevieve groaned softly. How encouraging. Clara laughed. I am serious. She adjusted several roses. People have become obsessed. Genevieve feared Clara might be right. Throughout the afternoon, additional guests continued arriving. Carriages crowded the circular drive. Servants hurried through the halls. Music rehearsals echoed from the ballroom. The estate hummed with anticipation. Shortly before 6 o'clock, Genevieve received an unexpected request. Eleanor wished to see her. Again. The dowager sat in her private sitting room reviewing correspondence when Genevieve arrived. Several opened letters rested across the desk. Eleanor appeared thoughtful. More thoughtful than usual. Close the door. Genevieve obeyed. Eleanor waited until they were alone. Then she removed a folded paper from among the letters. Another record arrived this morning. Genevieve immediately recognized the familiar pattern. More answers. More questions. Usually both. What kind of record? Eleanor handed it over. Genevieve examined the page. Her pulse quickened almost immediately. It contained legal filings related to Whitmore properties. Dates, names, signatures, notes written in fading ink. One name appeared repeatedly. Arthur Hargrove. Again. Eleanor nodded. Again. Genevieve studied the page. He was involved in everything. That appears increasingly likely. Silence followed. Eleanor watched her carefully. Genevieve. The use of her first name felt significant. Yes. You cannot remain hidden forever. The statement carried neither pressure nor judgment. Only truth. Genevieve looked away. I know. Eleanor's expression softened. Do you? The question lingered. Because the answer was complicated. For years hiding had been survival. Simplicity. Safety. Now everything was changing. Yet change remained frightening. Eleanor seemed to understand. She reached across the desk and squeezed Genevieve's hand gently. Whatever happens next, you will not face it alone. Emotion tightened Genevieve's throat unexpectedly. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door. Sebastian entered. He paused upon seeing them together, then smiled slightly. I hope I am not interrupting. Eleanor looked amused. You never seem concerned about interrupting. Sebastian accepted the observation with remarkable calm. Genevieve noticed. Eleanor noticed as well. A faint sparkle appeared in the dowager's eyes. In fact, Eleanor continued, perhaps you can help me solve a problem. Sebastian raised an eyebrow. A dangerous statement. Tonight's seating arrangements. Eleanor handed him several pages. Review them. Sebastian accepted the documents. His gaze briefly met Genevieve's. Something warm passed between them. Small, fleeting, impossible to miss. Eleanor definitely noticed. Genevieve suspected the older woman enjoyed noticing. The ballroom glittered beneath hundreds of candles that evening. Crystal chandeliers illuminated elegant gowns and polished uniforms. Music floated through the air. Laughter mingled with conversation. Blackthorn Hall had never looked more magnificent. Guests filled every corner of the room. Aristocrats gathered in conversational clusters. Mothers assessed potential marriages. Gentlemen discussed politics and investments. Young ladies pretended not to notice eligible bachelors. Everything appeared perfectly normal. Until Genevieve entered. She had no choice. Mrs. Baxter assigned her to assist with refreshments. Yet the moment she stepped into the ballroom, conversations shifted subtly. Heads turned. Whispers followed. People watched. Not openly. Not enough to violate etiquette. Yet enough. More than enough. Genevieve felt every glance. Every question. Every speculation. She focused on her duties. That strategy worked for approximately 15 minutes. Then Lady Victoria Graves approached. The future Duchess looked stunning. Her silver gown shimmered beneath candlelight. Diamonds sparkled at her throat. Every detail reflected wealth, status, and careful planning. Unfortunately, her expression suggested none of it had improved her mood. Miss Genevieve. The title sounded almost painful. Genevieve curtsied. My lady. Several nearby guests immediately became interested in entirely unrelated matters while remaining close enough to hear every word. Victoria smiled. The smile carried edges. You have become remarkably popular. Genevieve chose caution. People enjoy mysteries. Do they? Victoria's gaze sharpened. Or do they enjoy performances? The nearby guests grew noticeably quieter. Genevieve felt it. So did Victoria. Yet neither stepped away. I do not understand. Of course not. Victoria laughed softly. You have perfected innocence. The comment attracted additional attention. More guests drifted closer. Conversations slowed. Genevieve remained calm. My lady, if I have offended you... Offended me? Victoria interrupted. No. Her smile widened. You merely fascinate me. Something about her tone made Genevieve uneasy. How so? Victoria folded her hands elegantly. A servant arrives from nowhere. She speaks multiple languages, understands economics, discusses literature, captures the attention of an entire household. Silence spread outward like ripples across water. People were listening now, openly. Quite extraordinary. Genevieve realized exactly what was happening. Public humiliation disguised as curiosity. The oldest trick in society. Victoria continued. Tell me, which part was planned? A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others looked fascinated. Genevieve felt heat rise in her cheeks. Not from shame. From frustration. She had worked so hard to avoid attention. Yet here she stood at the center of it. Again. Nothing was planned. Victoria tilted her head. No. No. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Then everything happened by accident? The challenge hung between them. Genevieve searched for a response. Before she found one, Victoria delivered the next blow. How fortunate! The ballroom had grown remarkably quiet. Even the musicians seemed distant. Genevieve stood alone beneath dozens of watching eyes. Old instincts resurfaced. The familiar feeling of being judged, dismissed, measured, found lacking. Yet something had changed since arriving at Blackthorn Hall. She was no longer the woman who accepted every insult silently. She was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of apologizing for existing. Tired of pretending her intelligence required forgiveness. Actually, she said calmly, I do not believe fortune had much to do with it. The words surprised everyone, including herself. Victoria blinked. Excuse me? Genevieve met her gaze. Learning languages requires effort. Silence. Reading requires effort. More silence. Surviving difficult circumstances requires effort. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Genevieve's voice never rose. That made every word stronger. Victoria stared. How inspiring! The sarcasm failed. Because too many people had already heard the truth beneath the answer. Several ladies exchanged approving glances. One elderly baroness nodded almost imperceptibly. Genevieve noticed. So did Victoria. The future duchess's composure slipped slightly. You speak remarkably confidently for a servant. The words landed harder, crueler, designed to remind everyone exactly where Genevieve belonged, or supposedly belonged. The silence that followed felt painful, until another voice entered the conversation. Confidence generally comes from competence. Every head turned. Sebastian Ashcroft stood only a few feet away. No one had noticed his arrival. Genevieve certainly had not. He approached calmly, deliberately. The ballroom seemed to part around him. Victoria's expression changed instantly. Sebastian. He nodded politely, then looked toward Genevieve. Not briefly, not casually, directly. Miss Genevieve has demonstrated considerable competence. The room grew even quieter. If such a thing was possible. Victoria forced a smile. I was merely making conversation. Were you? Sebastian's tone remained pleasant. That somehow made it more powerful. Several guests suddenly became fascinated by nearby floral arrangements. Others watched openly. Victoria laughed lightly. Surely no one misunderstood. Sebastian did not answer immediately. Instead, he accepted a glass from a passing footman and handed it to Genevieve. The gesture lasted only seconds. Yet it carried enormous significance. Public significance. Visible significance. Every person in the ballroom saw it. You have been working all evening, he said. You should rest for a moment. Silence followed. Then whispers. Tiny. Immediate. Unavoidable. Genevieve felt her pulse quicken. Victoria heard them too. Color drained slightly from her face, because everyone understood what had just happened. The Duke of Blackthorn had publicly taken Genevieve's side. And in aristocratic society that changed everything. As the first murmurs spread across the ballroom, Genevieve glanced toward the far end of the room. Eleanor Ashcroft stood beside the orchestra platform watching the entire scene. Their eyes met briefly. The dowager did not look surprised. She looked satisfied, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment all along. And somehow, that realization felt even more significant than the whispers now racing through the room. The whispers did not fade when the music resumed. If anything, they multiplied. Genevieve felt them moving through the ballroom like currents beneath calm water. Every glance carried questions. Every conversation seemed to pause when she passed. Yet none of that compared to the expression on Victoria Graves' face. The future Duchess maintained her smile. Years of aristocratic training prevented any public loss of composure. Still, Genevieve saw the tension beneath it. So did everyone else. Sebastian's intervention had altered the balance of the evening. Not dramatically, not openly, but enough. More than enough. Enjoy your rest, Miss Genevieve. Sebastian's voice remained calm. The refreshments can survive without you for 5 minutes. A few guests laughed softly. The atmosphere eased. Yet the message remained unmistakable. Genevieve was no longer standing alone. Victoria lowered her eyes briefly. When she looked up again, her smile had returned. Of course. Her voice sounded smooth, controlled. We would not wish to overwork valuable staff. The emphasis did not go unnoticed. Neither did Sebastian's response. Quite right. His tone remained pleasant. Competent people are always valuable. The room absorbed the exchange immediately. Genevieve wished she could disappear. Instead, she accepted the glass of water Sebastian had handed her and stepped back slightly. The musicians resumed playing. Conversations gradually returned. Yet the evening had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Ashcroft continued watching. Her expression remained unreadable. Later, Genevieve would realize she had not merely been observing. She had been waiting. Nearly an hour passed before the next surprise arrived. Guests mingled through adjoining salons. Some danced. Others gathered near the orchestra. Several influential gentlemen occupied a corner discussing politics with great seriousness and very little agreement. Genevieve had returned to her duties. Keeping busy felt safer, simpler. She was carrying a tray through one of the smaller reception rooms when she noticed Eleanor speaking with Mr. Holloway near a side doorway. Both appeared unusually focused. The elderly solicitor carried a thick leather case beneath one arm. Papers protruded from the edges. Genevieve slowed instinctively. Something about the scene felt important. Moments later, a footman approached Eleanor. The dowager nodded once. Then she turned toward the ballroom entrance and raised her voice. Not loudly, yet somehow everyone heard. Ladies and gentlemen. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Within seconds, silence spread across the room. Eleanor Ashcroft possessed that effect on people. She stepped toward the center of the ballroom. Mr. Holloway followed carrying the leather case. Sebastian immediately moved closer. Victoria looked confused. Genevieve felt unease settle in her stomach. Eleanor smiled politely. Forgive the interruption. No one objected. An unexpected development occurred this afternoon. Instantly, attention sharpened. Curiosity filled the room. Eleanor continued. Many of you are aware that questions have recently emerged regarding the Whitmore family. A murmur swept through the guests. Genevieve's pulse quickened. Mr. Holloway opened the leather case. Several documents appeared. Old documents. Official documents. The atmosphere changed immediately. Additional records were discovered this week, Eleanor said. Records that required verification. Silence deepened. Even the musicians watched now. Sebastian folded his arms. Victoria looked increasingly uncomfortable. Genevieve stood frozen near the edge of the room. Every instinct warned her that something significant was about to happen. Eleanor accepted one document from Mr. Holloway. For many years, certain assumptions regarding the Whitmore estate were accepted as fact. She glanced toward the gathered guests. Those assumptions appear to have been incorrect. Whispers erupted, then faded again. Everyone waited. Mr. Holloway, the solicitor, stepped forward. His voice carried clearly despite his age. Over the past several days, I have reviewed surviving legal records connected to the Whitmore holdings. He opened a folder. Several irregularities were discovered. More murmurs. Genevieve saw Lord Pennington exchange a startled glance with another gentleman. Nearby, two countesses leaned forward attentively. Mr. Holloway continued. Signatures previously believed authentic appear questionable. A collective intake of breath followed. Property transfers were approved under circumstances that now require investigation. The ballroom had become completely silent. Victoria shifted slightly. Sebastian remained motionless. Eleanor watched the crowd carefully. Then Mr. Holloway delivered the statement that changed everything. There is substantial evidence that the legal dissolution of the Whitmore estate was improperly executed. Silence crashed down. No one spoke. No one moved. Genevieve could barely breathe, because if the statement was true, everything changed. Not only her identity, her family's history, their legacy, their reputation, everything. Questions erupted immediately. Improperly? What does that mean? Surely not. Voices overlapped. Eleanor raised one hand. Order returned. We are not announcing conclusions. Her gaze remained steady. Only facts. Yet the facts alone were astonishing. Mr. Holloway produced additional documents. Records. Correspondence. Financial ledgers. Piece by piece, a larger picture emerged. Arthur Hargrove's name appeared repeatedly. Unusual transactions appeared repeatedly. Missing authorizations appeared repeatedly. The pattern became difficult to ignore. Genevieve listened in stunned silence. For years she had believed her family's disappearance was simply tragedy, misfortune, bad luck. Now another possibility emerged. One far more complicated. One far more disturbing. Yet throughout the presentation, Eleanor remained careful, measured, respectable. She accused no one, declared no verdicts, presented only evidence, which somehow made it even more powerful. Eventually, questions gave way to thoughtful discussion. Guests clustered into groups. Speculation spread rapidly. The Whitmore mystery had become the only topic anyone wished to discuss. Genevieve stood near a marble column trying to process everything she had heard. She barely noticed Sebastian approaching until he stopped beside her. "Are you all right?" The concern in his voice felt genuine. Genevieve nodded automatically, then shook her head. "I do not know." "Reasonable." She laughed softly despite herself. "Is that your professional assessment?" "Among other things." His expression softened. "This is a great deal to absorb." Genevieve looked toward the crowd. "Everyone is staring." "Yes. That is not comforting." A smile touched his mouth. "No, it probably is not." Silence settled briefly, yet it felt different now. Easier. Familiar. Genevieve realized she no longer felt nervous around him. Dangerous realization. Very dangerous. Before either could continue, a voice interrupted. "Sebastian." Victoria approached. Elegant. Beautiful. Perfectly composed. At least outwardly. Her eyes told another story. "May I speak with you?" Sebastian glanced at her, then nodded. "Of course." Victoria's gaze flickered toward Genevieve. Brief, cool, controlled. Then she turned away. Sebastian hesitated. "I will find you later." The words emerged naturally, casually. Yet Genevieve felt several nearby guests notice them immediately. So did Victoria. The future Duchess walked away without another word. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur. Discussions continued. The Whitmore name echoed through every room in Blackthorn Hall. Some guests appeared shocked, others fascinated. A few seemed deeply uncomfortable. Shortly after midnight, the gathering finally began to disperse. Carriages departed. Musicians packed their instruments. Servants extinguished candles. The estate gradually quieted. Genevieve thought the day was over. She was wrong. The following morning brought the arrival of another visitor. This time the guest was unexpected. A middle-aged gentleman dressed in conservative black arrived carrying several sealed document boxes. He introduced himself as a legal representative from London. Within an hour, Eleanor, Sebastian, Mr. Holloway, and several advisors had gathered in the library. Genevieve received a summons shortly afterward. The atmosphere inside the library felt different from previous meetings. Anticipation lingered in the air. The London representative stood beside a large table covered with papers. These records were located in private storage. He opened one of the boxes carefully. They concerned the final years of the Whitmore estate. Genevieve sat beside Eleanor. Sebastian occupied the chair across from her. Victoria remained absent. The omission felt noticeable. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Documents appeared one after another. Letters, property records, financial statements. Gradually, the evidence grew stronger. Strong enough that even the most skeptical observers could no longer dismiss it. Then the representative removed a final folder from the last box. "This may be the most significant item." The room fell silent. He opened the folder. Inside rested a certified record bearing several official seals. Mr. Holloway adjusted his spectacles. Eleanor leaned forward. Sebastian watched closely. The representative cleared his throat. "This document identifies the surviving legal heir to the Whitmore family holdings." Genevieve's pulse accelerated instantly. No one spoke. The representative looked toward her, then toward the document. "The name recorded here is Genevieve Whitmore." Silence. Complete silence. The room seemed to stop breathing. Genevieve stared at the page. Her own name stared back. written in faded ink. Preserved for more than 2 decades. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Emotion flickered across her features. Mr. Holloway smiled with visible relief. Sebastian looked at Genevieve. Not the document. Her. The representative continued speaking, explaining legal implications, verification requirements, formal procedures. Genevieve heard almost none of it, because one truth echoed louder than everything else. For the first time in 22 years, she was no longer a mystery. The evidence existed. The records existed. The truth existed. And very soon the entire country would know it. Outside the library windows, sunlight spilled across the gardens of Blackthorn Hall. Inside, a lost name had finally begun its journey home. The announcement spread across England with astonishing speed. Within 3 days, letters carrying the news had reached London. Within a week, the Whitmore name once again appeared in drawing rooms, private clubs, and aristocratic conversations throughout the country. Society loved many things: scandal, mystery, romance, lost heirs. The return of Genevieve Whitmore offered all 4. Blackthorn Hall became the center of attention. Visitors arrived almost daily. Some came to congratulate. Others came to investigate. A few came simply to satisfy curiosity. Genevieve endured it all with increasing patience and decreasing enthusiasm. She had spent years unnoticed. Fame proved exhausting. The greatest change, however, occurred inside the estate itself. No one treated her as a servant anymore, not even the staff. Mrs. Baxter continued assigning duties out of habit. Genevieve continued helping out of gratitude. Yet everyone understood those days were ending. The transition felt strange. She had built a life around anonymity. Now she was expected to step into a position she barely remembered belonging to. One afternoon, Eleanor found her arranging flowers in the library. The sight immediately earned a sigh. You know, there are 6 footmen and 3 maids capable of handling that task. Genevieve adjusted a rose. Possibly. Then why are you doing it? Because the flowers are safer than lawyers. Eleanor laughed. The sound filled the room warmly. A fair observation. She sat nearby and studied Genevieve carefully. How are you managing? Genevieve considered the question honestly. Some moments feel wonderful. Eleanor nodded. And others? Terrifying. The answer earned understanding rather than surprise. That is normal. Genevieve looked toward the tall windows. Summer sunlight flooded the gardens outside. Everything appeared peaceful. Yet her world felt anything but peaceful. Everyone suddenly knows who I am. Eleanor smiled gently. No. Genevieve looked back. No. They are only beginning to learn. The words lingered, because they were true. For years Genevieve had hidden pieces of herself even from herself. Now those pieces slowly returned. Through documents, through stories, through memories, through people who had known her family. The process felt overwhelming. It also felt necessary. A knock interrupted the conversation. Sebastian entered carrying several folders. His presence altered the atmosphere immediately. Not dramatically, simply naturally, as though he belonged wherever Genevieve happened to be. An observation she was trying very hard not to notice. I hope I am not interrupting. Eleanor looked amused. You ask that question less convincingly every time. Sebastian accepted the criticism without protest. Genevieve smiled despite herself. He noticed. His expression softened. He always seemed pleased when she smiled. Another observation she was trying not to notice. More records? Eleanor asked. Sebastian nodded. Additional correspondence from London. He handed over several documents. The legal review is progressing faster than expected. Eleanor skimmed the first page. Her eyebrows rose. Remarkable. Sebastian looked toward Genevieve. Good news. I am beginning to fear those words. Do not. A faint smile touched his mouth. This time they deserve confidence. Over the next hour they reviewed updates regarding the Whitmore estate. Legal obstacles were disappearing one by one. Historical records continued supporting Genevieve's claim. Witnesses continued emerging. Evidence continued strengthening. The truth no longer felt fragile. felt inevitable. Yet throughout the discussion, Genevieve noticed something else. Sebastian rarely looked at the documents when she was speaking. He looked at her. The realization became increasingly difficult to ignore. Unfortunately, she was not the only person noticing. Victoria certainly noticed. The following evening brought another formal gathering. Smaller than the ballroom event. More intimate, yet still attended by influential guests. Genevieve arrived in a simple blue gown Eleanor had insisted she wear. Not servant clothing. Not aristocratic extravagance. Something in between. The effect proved surprisingly powerful. Conversations paused when she entered the room. Several guests smiled warmly. Others nodded respectfully. No one looked confused anymore. No one questioned whether she belonged. Society had accepted the evidence. Now society accepted her. The change felt surreal. Across the room, Victoria watched silently. Genevieve almost felt sorry for her. Almost. During the evening, she overheard more than one guest discussing the future. The Whitmore holdings. The restored family name. The possibilities ahead. None of those conversations surprised her. One conversation did. Two countesses stood near a fireplace speaking quietly. The Duke seems happier lately. Genevieve immediately focused on a nearby flower arrangement. I noticed that. The second woman smiled knowingly. Everyone noticed that. Pause followed. Lady Victoria certainly noticed. The first countess lowered her voice. Do you think he realizes it? Realizes what? The older woman laughed softly. That he spends half his time looking for Miss Whitmore. Genevieve escaped before hearing the answer. Yet the words followed her all evening. Because they reflected thoughts she had been trying to avoid herself. Later that night, after most guests had departed, she wandered into the east garden seeking quiet. Moonlight silvered the pathways. Roses perfumed the warm summer air. The estate slept peacefully. Or nearly peacefully. I thought I might find you here. Genevieve closed her eyes briefly, then smiled. You always seem to know where I am. Sebastian approached. Not always. Frequently enough. He laughed softly. The sound felt comfortable now. Familiar. Dangerous. They walked slowly along the garden path. Neither seemed eager to return inside. You handled tonight well, Sebastian said. Did I? Very well. Genevieve looked toward the moonlit roses. I still feel as though everyone is watching. They are. She groaned. Sebastian laughed again. That was not intended as encouragement. Then perhaps improve your technique. A fair criticism. Silence settled. Comfortable silence. Increasingly common silence. Eventually Sebastian spoke again. Do you regret it? Genevieve glanced at him. Regret what? Being found. The question surprised her. Because it mattered. More than most people would understand. She thought carefully before answering. Sometimes. Honesty felt easier with him. Only sometimes? The attention is exhausting. Agreed. The uncertainty is exhausting. Also agreed. Genevieve smiled faintly. You are remarkably supportive. I try. They continued walking. Then she looked at him properly. Really looked. Strong profile. Steady eyes. Quiet confidence. Kindness hidden beneath restraint. At some point he had become important to her. The realization arrived suddenly. Clearly. Uncomfortably. Genevieve looked away first. Too late. Sebastian had noticed. His expression changed slightly. Softened. Deepened. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then voices drifted from a nearby terrace. Guests. Returning indoors. The moment vanished. Yet something remained. The next morning shattered whatever peace had survived. Victoria requested a private conversation. The message arrived through a footman shortly after breakfast. Genevieve considered refusing. Curiosity ultimately prevailed. They met in a small sitting room overlooking the western gardens. Victoria stood near the window when Genevieve entered. Elegant as always. Composed as always. Yet something about her posture seemed strained. You wish to see me? Victoria turned. Her smile appeared almost weary. Yes. Silence followed. Then she sighed. I suppose congratulations are appropriate. Genevieve blinked. The opening surprised her. Thank you. Victoria nodded once. You have achieved something remarkable. The words sounded sincere, almost, yet tension lingered beneath them. I did not achieve it alone. No. Victoria looked away briefly. That may be the problem. Genevieve waited. Victoria's gaze returned. Do you know what people are saying? The question carried strange weight. People are saying many things. About you and Sebastian. Silence filled the room. Genevieve's pulse quickened. Victoria laughed softly. Not happily. Exactly. The reaction said enough. There is nothing inappropriate happening. Victoria's expression tightened. Perhaps not. She stepped closer. Yet everyone sees it. Genevieve remained silent. Including him. The words landed unexpectedly hard. Victoria studied her face carefully. You truly do not know. Know what? For the first time, genuine sadness appeared in Victoria's eyes. Not jealousy. Not anger. Sadness. He loves you. Silence crashed down. Complete silence. Genevieve stared. Victoria looked away toward the gardens. I realized it weeks ago. Her voice had become very quiet. Long before he did. The room seemed suddenly too small. Too warm. Too fragile. Genevieve could not speak. Could barely think. Because part of her already knew. Part of her had known for some time. Yet hearing the words aloud changed everything. Victoria inhaled slowly. Then straightened. Aristocratic composure returned. I thought you deserved the truth. She moved toward the door. Paused. Then looked back one final time. The question now is whether he realizes he is about to lose you. The door closed softly behind her. Genevieve remained alone in the sitting room. Motionless. Silent. Heart racing. Outside, summer sunlight spilled across the gardens of Blackthorn Hall. Inside, a truth she had spent weeks avoiding finally stood before her. And for the first time since her identity had been restored, the thing she feared losing most was no longer her past. It was Sebastian Ashcroft. Genevieve remained in the sitting room long after Victoria departed. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful. Not comforting. Heavy with realization. He loves you. The words echoed relentlessly through her thoughts. She should have dismissed them, questioned them. Yet honesty made that impossible. Too many moments suddenly aligned. Too many glances. Too many conversations. Too many times Sebastian had appeared exactly when she needed him most. Victoria had not revealed a fantasy. She had revealed something Genevieve had been refusing to acknowledge. More troubling still, the feeling was not one-sided. By evening, Blackthorn Hall felt strangely unfamiliar. Corridors she knew by heart seemed different. Rooms she had crossed hundreds of times felt altered. Nothing around her had changed. She had. The realization followed her through dinner. Through conversations. Through every encounter. Most of all, it followed her whenever Sebastian entered a room. The next morning brought another significant development. Eleanor requested Genevieve's presence in the library immediately after breakfast. The message sounded urgent. When Genevieve arrived, she discovered Sebastian already there. Mr. Holloway occupied one side of the large table. Several legal advisors sat nearby. Stacks of documents covered nearly every available surface. Eleanor looked pleased. Very pleased. That alone suggested important news. Sit down. Genevieve obeyed. Mr. Holloway adjusted his spectacles. I believe we are approaching the conclusion of this matter. Hope stirred cautiously. What matter? The elderly solicitor smiled. All of it. Over the next hour, final reports were reviewed. Remaining legal challenges had been resolved. Additional witnesses had verified earlier findings. Historical records supported every major claim. Piece by piece, the puzzle had finally become complete. Eleanor listened carefully. Sebastian asked thoughtful questions. Genevieve struggled to absorb everything. Then Mr. Holloway reached the final document. The room grew noticeably quieter. There remains one last issue. Genevieve immediately tensed. Eleanor noticed. Nothing alarming. Mr. Holloway nodded. Merely formal. He opened the folder. A public declaration will be required. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. Expected. Yes. Mr. Holloway smiled. Yet important. Genevieve looked between them. Public declaration? Eleanor answered gently. Society already believes the truth. Now society must officially hear it. The words carried weight. A public declaration meant more than paperwork. More than legal recognition. It meant standing before everyone. Claiming her name. Her history. Her place. The thought terrified her. Eleanor seemed to understand immediately. You are not alone. Genevieve looked at her gratefully. I know. And she did know. Perhaps for the first time in her life. The meeting concluded shortly afterward. Advisors departed. Documents were gathered. Mr. Holloway returned to London preparations. Eventually only 3 people remained in the library. Eleanor, Sebastian, Genevieve. The silence felt comfortable. Familiar. Then Eleanor stood. I suddenly remember an appointment. Sebastian looked suspicious. Do you? Very important. The dowager smiled innocently. Extremely urgent. Genevieve almost laughed. Eleanor rarely attempted subtlety. Today she was not even trying. Moments later, she disappeared through the doorway, leaving them alone. Again, Sebastian watched the closed door. She planned that. Completely. He smiled. Good. We agree. Silence settled. Yet beneath it, tension lingered. Different tension now. Personal tension. Neither seemed entirely certain where to begin. Finally Sebastian spoke. Victoria left this morning. Genevieve looked up. Surprise flickered across her face. She did. He nodded. Shortly after breakfast. Is she well? The question emerged automatically. Sebastian's expression softened. She will be. Genevieve lowered her gaze. I am sorry. So am I. His honesty earned immediate respect. He continued carefully. Victoria deserves someone who chooses her without hesitation. Silence followed. Then Genevieve asked the question that mattered. And do you? Sebastian's answer arrived without delay. No. The word hung between them. Simple. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. Genevieve's pulse quickened. Sebastian stood slowly, walked toward the window, then turned back. Something had changed in him. The restraint she had always admired remained. Yet determination had joined it. I spent months convincing myself my interest was curiosity. Genevieve listened silently. Then I convinced myself it was concern. A faint smile touched his mouth. After that, admiration. He shook his head. I was remarkably persistent. Her heart began racing. Sebastian looked directly at her. Unfortunately, none of those explanations were true. Silence filled the library. Every sound seemed distant. Every thought seemed suspended. Sebastian. His name escaped softly. He crossed the remaining distance between them. Not hurriedly. Not dramatically. Simply with certainty. I should have understood sooner. Genevieve could barely breathe. Understood what? A warmth entered his eyes she had never seen before. Not fully. Not openly. Until now. That the most important person in Blackthorn Hall was never the future Duchess everyone expected. Emotion tightened her throat. Sebastian continued quietly. It was the woman arranging flowers in the library. Genevieve laughed unexpectedly. The sound trembled. That is an absurdly romantic thing to say. I know. You practiced it. Possibly. Despite everything, she smiled. So did he. The moment felt perfect. Which was exactly why fear returned. Genevieve looked away. No. Sebastian frowned slightly. No. You do not understand. She stood and moved toward the opposite side of the room. Distance felt necessary. Safe. Genevieve. Everything has changed. The words emerged faster now. More honestly. A few months ago I was a servant. She turned. Now I am suddenly expected to reclaim a family legacy. Emotion thickened her voice. I do not even know who I am becoming. Sebastian listened without interruption. And you are a duke. The title felt heavier than ever. One of the most powerful men in England. She shook her head. What happens when reality returns? Silence followed. Long, thoughtful silence. Then Sebastian crossed the room once more. Reality returned weeks ago. His voice remained calm, steady, certain. Reality is the woman standing in front of me. Genevieve closed her eyes briefly. The answer hurt because she wanted to believe it, wanted it desperately, yet fear remained stronger. At least for now. I cannot. The words emerged almost as a whisper. Sebastian became very still. Not angry, not offended, simply still. Cannot. Genevieve forced herself to meet his gaze. Not yet. Pain flickered across his expression. Brief but unmistakable. It nearly broke her resolve. I need time. Silence followed. Then another. Finally Sebastian nodded. Once. All right. The answer surprised her. That is all. A faint smile appeared. Sad. Patient. Entirely too kind. You asked for time. Not distance. Emotion tightened her chest unexpectedly. Sebastian stepped back, giving her space, respecting the boundary. Yet his next words carried quiet certainty. I am not withdrawing my feelings. Genevieve stared. Sebastian. I mean that. His gaze never wavered. Take whatever time you need. Silence settled around them. Not empty silence. Hopeful silence. The kind that belongs to beginnings rather than endings. Later that evening, Genevieve stood alone beside the east terrace watching sunset spill across the gardens. Gold light painted the lawns. Roses glowed beneath the fading sky. The estate looked beautiful, peaceful. Behind her, footsteps approached. Familiar footsteps. She smiled before turning. Sebastian stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. Neither needed to. The silence felt easier now. More honest. After several moments, he glanced toward the horizon. I have a question. Genevieve smiled faintly. Another one? An important one. That sounds dangerous. Probably. He looked at her directly. When you are ready. Her heartbeat quickened immediately. Yes. A warmth entered his expression. Quiet. Steady. Unshakable. Will you allow me to ask properly? Emotion caught her completely off guard. Because she understood exactly what he meant. Not today. Not tomorrow. But someday. A future. Possibility. A choice. Genevieve looked toward the sunset. Then back at him. Her answer came softly. Yet without uncertainty. When I am ready. Relief flashed across his face. Followed immediately by something deeper. Hope. They stood together as the final sunlight faded beyond the gardens of Blackthorn Hall. Neither knew exactly what the future would look like. Yet for the first time both were walking toward the same future. And somewhere within the quiet certainty of that realization, the last barriers between them had finally begun to fall. 3 months later, London gathered to witness something it had not seen in more than 2 decades. The formal restoration of the Whitmore name. Invitations had traveled across England. Nobles arrived from distant counties. Influential families attended in person. Even those who had once dismissed the Whitmore story now appeared eager to participate in history. The event was hosted at Blackthorn Hall. No other location would have felt appropriate. The estate had become the place where the truth returned, where a forgotten daughter had been found, where a mystery had become a family again. Early that morning, Genevieve stood alone in the east garden. Dew still clung to the roses. The air carried the fresh scent of summer. For a few precious minutes, everything remained quiet. No guests, no expectations, no ceremonies, just sunlight and birdsong. Hiding. Eleanor's voice carried gentle amusement. Genevieve turned and smiled. Briefly, the dowager approached slowly. Age had never diminished her presence. She still carried herself with effortless authority. Yet this morning, there was something softer in her expression, something maternal. Nervous. Genevieve laughed quietly. Terrified. Good. Good. Eleanor nodded. It means you understand the importance of today. Genevieve looked toward the distant estate. Carriages were already beginning to arrive. Everything changed so quickly. Eleanor followed her gaze. Not quickly. The older woman smiled. The truth simply took time catching up. Silence settled comfortably between them. Then Eleanor reached into her reticule and produced a small velvet box. Genevieve immediately recognized it. The Whitmore ring rested inside. Carefully polished. Beautiful as ever. Eleanor held it out. Your mother would have wanted you to wear it today. Emotion tightened Genevieve's throat instantly. She accepted the box carefully. The silver lark gleamed beneath the morning light. For a moment she could almost imagine Caroline standing beside her. Smiling. Watching. Proud. Thank you. Eleanor squeezed her hand gently. No. Her voice softened. Thank you. Before Genevieve could respond, another familiar figure appeared along the garden path. Sebastian. The sight of him still affected her. That fact had become impossible to deny. He looked exceptionally handsome in formal attire. More importantly, he looked happy. Truly happy. Eleanor noticed both reactions immediately. Her smile became suspiciously knowing. I suddenly remember another urgent appointment. Genevieve laughed. Again. I am a very busy woman. The dowager departed without further explanation. Neither of them believed the excuse. Sebastian watched her leave. She planned that. Completely. He smiled. Good. The answer felt familiar. So did the warmth that followed. They walked slowly through the gardens. Neither seemed eager to discuss the ceremony. Or perhaps both understood what mattered more. How are you feeling? Sebastian asked. Genevieve considered the question. Less terrified than this morning. Progress. Marginal progress. He laughed softly. The sound still made her smile. They reached the rose garden and stopped near the stone bench where the Whitmore ring had first appeared months earlier. The memory felt significant now. Almost symbolic. Sebastian looked around thoughtfully. You know. Genevieve raised an eyebrow. Dangerous opening. Probably. He folded his arms. When I first saw you, I thought you were unusually calm for a servant. Genevieve laughed. That was your first impression? No. His expression warmed. My first impression was that my mother had lost her mind. She laughed harder. The sound echoed through the roses. Sebastian smiled. Then his expression gradually softened. My second impression was that you were extraordinary. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Honest silence. Genevieve looked at him. Really looked at him. She remembered the man who had stood confused in a crowded room while his mother curtsied to a maid. The man who had asked questions when others made assumptions. The man who had protected her publicly when remaining silent would have been easier. The man who had waited. Patiently. Respectfully. Without demanding certainty before she was ready to give it. The realization felt wonderfully clear. Sebastian. He immediately focused on her. Yes. Genevieve smiled. I am ready. For one brief moment he simply stared. Then understanding appeared. Followed by hope. Followed by something even deeper. Are you sure? Genevieve nodded. Very sure. Relief crossed his face. Yet he remained entirely himself. Steady. Controlled. Careful with her heart. One of the reasons she loved him. The realization no longer frightened her. Simply felt true. Sebastian reached into his coat pocket. Genevieve blinked. Then laughed. You brought it with you? I have carried it for weeks. Weeks. I am a cautious man. She laughed again. The ring he produced was elegant. Timeless. Beautiful without being extravagant. Somehow perfectly suited to him. To them. Sebastian drew a slow breath. Then looked directly into her eyes. Genevieve Whitmore. Her heart raced. The first time I noticed you, I believed I was looking at a mystery. His voice remained calm. Steady. Entirely sincere. I eventually realized I was looking at the woman I wanted beside me for the rest of my life. Emotion threatened immediately. Sebastian. He smiled softly. Will you marry me? The garden seemed to disappear. The estate disappeared. The world disappeared. There was only this moment. This man. This future. Genevieve felt tears gathering despite her best efforts. Yes. The answer emerged instantly. Effortlessly. Yes. Relief and joy transformed his expression. Neither attempted to hide it. Neither wanted to. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt less like a beginning and more like arriving home. News traveled through Blackthorn Hall with astonishing speed. By the time they returned to the main house, Eleanor already knew. Clara somehow knew as well. Several footmen appeared suspiciously unsurprised. Mrs. Baxter cried openly. She denied doing so. Nobody believed her. The formal restoration ceremony took place that afternoon. The grand ballroom overflowed with guests. Nobility filled every seat. Conversations hummed with anticipation. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows, illuminating crystal chandeliers and polished marble. At the center of the room stood a platform prepared for the occasion. Genevieve had never seen so many people gathered in one place. Once, the attention would have terrified her. Today felt different, because she finally understood something important. She did not need to earn her place. It had always been hers. Mr. Holloway began the proceedings. Documents were presented. Historical records reviewed. Legal confirmations announced. Everything unfolded exactly as expected. Yet emotion lingered beneath every word. This was not merely bureaucracy. It was restoration. Finally, the solicitor reached the conclusion. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom. The evidence is complete. The claim is verified. The Whitmore line survives through Lady Genevieve Whitmore. Applause erupted immediately. Loud, genuine, sustained. Genevieve looked out across the crowd. Faces blurred slightly through unexpected tears. She saw Clara cheering enthusiastically. Mrs. Baxter dabbing her eyes. Thomas Mercer smiling proudly. She saw dozens of people who had once doubted now standing in support. Then she saw Eleanor. The dowager stood near the front of the room. Their eyes met. The older woman smiled. Slowly, deliberately, Eleanor Ashcroft stepped forward. The ballroom quieted. Everyone watched. Everyone understood something important was about to happen. Genevieve's breath caught, because she remembered. Months ago, crowded room, a drop tray, a curtsy nobody understood. Eleanor stopped directly before her. Then, in full view of every guest, every noble, every witness present, the Dowager Duchess performed a graceful curtsy. Not to a servant, not to a mystery, not to a rumor, to Lady Genevieve Whitmore, the rightful heir, the daughter her mother had fought to protect, the woman who had finally come home. Complete silence filled the ballroom. Then applause returned, louder than before, stronger than before, more emotional than before. Genevieve could not speak. Eleanor rose and smiled through tears she made no effort to hide. "Welcome back, my dear." The words shattered what little composure remained. Genevieve embraced her. The crowd applauded again. Many guests openly wiped away tears. Even several gentlemen appeared suspiciously affected. Beside the platform, Sebastian watched everything unfold. Pride filled his expression. Love filled it too. This time no one missed it. No one questioned it. Several weeks later, another gathering filled Blackthorn Hall. Smaller than the restoration ceremony. Happier than any event before it. Wedding bells echoed across the estate. Roses decorated every room. Music drifted through open windows. Laughter seemed endless. Genevieve stood at the front of the chapel wearing a gown she never could have imagined during those quiet days as a maid. Yet the dress was not what mattered. The guests were not what mattered. The title waiting for her afterward was not what mattered. Sebastian mattered. The future mattered. The life they were choosing together mattered. When the ceremony concluded, applause filled the chapel once again. Husband and wife, Duke and Duchess. Yet neither title captured the truth. They had chosen one another long before any ceremony confirmed it. Later, during the reception, Clara found Genevieve standing beside the terrace overlooking the gardens. "Do you ever think about it?" Clara asked. "Think about what?" Clara smiled. "The first day." Genevieve laughed softly. "Constantly." Clara shook her head in amazement. "You arrived carrying a tray. And dropped it. Spectacularly." They both laughed. Then Clara glanced across the ballroom where Sebastian was speaking with guests. "Worth it." Genevieve followed her gaze. Sebastian looked up at exactly the same moment. Their eyes met across the crowded room. His expression softened immediately, as though no one else existed. as though she was still the first person he searched for whenever he entered a room. Genevieve smiled. Absolutely worth it. Beyond the windows, summer sunlight bathed Blackthorn Hall in gold. Inside, music played. Families celebrated. Friends laughed. And the woman once overlooked by everyone had become Duchess of Blackthorn. Not because society finally recognized her worth. Because the people who truly mattered had recognized it from the very beginning.